Okay, guys, sorry about the delay there. I need to get somebody else in here, so just hold on. We're going to do an official start now. Here we go.
What's the Church of Scientology so afraid of?
This is SPTV.
Listen to me. Please listen. If you don't, if you won't, if you fail to understand, then the same incredible terror that's menacing me will strike at you!
My name is Norman Starkey. I'm a founding Scientologist, having received my first services in South Africa in 1960. I'm also a founding staff member. I've been on staff for 51 years. I knew and worked closely with Mr. L. Ron Hubbard for some 20 years. I served him in many capacities. I was one of his personal aides and also became the captain of his 3,300-ton ship that served as his home. On his departure from this life, I was appointed by him to be the trustee and executor of his estate.
Okay, so there you have it. Norman Starkey, who a longtime veteran Sea Org member, L. Ron Hubbard's right-hand man, has passed. I don't know. I'm trying to get Jeffrey Augustine in here, and I don't know why he's unable to find it. I sent him a link. Sorry about that. That was something else. Okay. Anyway, so the church has been keeping these things a secret, and it's really kind of a mystery why. And Jeffrey helped me to confirm the death. I heard about it somewhere else. Hold on one second. I'm going to try to, I don't know where Jeffrey is. Hold on one second. I think I'm going to have to call him. This is going to be a first. If you all don't mind, I'm going to need to call Jeffrey. So yeah, this is like, it's not new news. He died Hey, Jeffrey?
Yeah.
So I sent the link to your messenger.
Yeah, I'm getting, it's the link to your YouTube and not the StreamYard.
Oh yeah, okay, hold on one second. I'll send that to you. Hold on,
Okay.
You stand by.
Thank you.
Okay, hold on, guys. I just got to send this to him. Just bear with me. Give me 1 second, because this is going to be worth it. I promise. Okay, he should have that now, and he should be on shortly. So anyway, thanks for bearing with me. Things got a little bit off to a hectic start today. So yeah, we want to discuss why the church is keeping these deaths a secret. It's just a total mystery. Here's Jeffrey. Let me bring him on. Hey, Jeffrey, welcome aboard. Sorry about the confusion.
No, Mitch, it happens. It's technical stuff.
Yeah.
Glad to be on.
Yeah, but here we are. I guess, did you see the video that I put up?
Yes, I did.
Okay, great.
It was a very touching piece.
Well, the church isn't talking about it. They're not going to memorialize him. So I figured it was my job to do that. I knew him. I considered him a friend.
Yeah, I know you did. And I think it's great that we're doing it today. And Karen's going to be on in a little while.
Right.
So really, yeah, the church does have a history of not announcing deaths, of covering up deaths.
Right.
And the real history of it goes back to the death of L. Ron Hubbard. And if you remember Robert Von Young,
Hmm.
you remember? Did you know him?
I didn't know him personally, but I certainly know his story and his involvement with the church.
Yeah. Well, he did a video in which, when L. Ron Hubbard died, okay, he died of his third stroke. You know the story of Hubbard's death. He's changed his will the day before he died, and when he died, everyone went up to Creston, California. That's Robert Von Young, David Miscavige, a lot of other people, and that's where they created the myth that L. Ron Hubbard was perfectly healthy, and he dropped his body because it was an impediment to upper level research and moved on. So in 1986, they couldn't have Hubbard old post-stroke on psychiatric tranquilizer, which was a hospice drug, Vistrol. And, they've always done this. They've covered up deaths, suicides, and strange things. And Norman, according to my research, passed away in 2019.
Right.
Yeah. And, an interesting thing, I was hired by an attorney to investigate something concerning a Sea Org member, and that's all I will say. And when you professionally investigate and you look for somebody, most Sea Org members look like people who live off the grid. I mean, if you
Right.
investigate a survivalist or someone who's living off the grid, most Sea Org members only have 3 addresses. It's usually Gold Base, or L. Ron Hubbard Way, or Clearwater. That's it. So I don't even know the last known whereabouts of Norman Starkey. I have a note that he passed away in 2019, and he's from South Africa. So I don't even know if he died in the U.S.
Right.
What did you hear, Mitch?
Well, I mean, I heard that he was in Europe in 2018, somewhere, maybe England, receiving treatment, alternative treatment for bladder cancer. And then I saw him after that at Gold in around sometime 2017, 2018. And then that was it.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I kind of thought he was in the country, but he could have gone abroad to die. For all I know, he died on the ship and they just threw his body overboard. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, you don't.
But I got to tell you one thing. I mean, they're keeping these things so quiet. There's no reason. What could possibly be the reason not announcing this, especially for years and years and years? They're supposed to issue a document that says that the person is gone, thank them for their service, give them, I think it's 28 years to come back. They do this little ritual, but they've just stopped doing it. And I just can't imagine why. Plus I just have to ask you, Jeffrey, because Norman was the executor of the estate and a trustee of the estate and executor of the will. Is there some complication because now he's gone? Does this mess with the financial instrument of the bizarre corporate structure of Scientology?
No, what happened is when L. Ron Hubbard passed away, there's an older Scientology lawyer, quite wealthy, named Norton Carno,
Mhm.
Karno. He was purportedly going to be the executor, and there was some change at the last minute where Norman was appointed because he had been, captain of the Apollo for a while. He'd been
Right.
he had served, and he was good at taking orders. So he became the executor, but that was sort of in a name only. He didn't really have the legal power. David Miscavige would not give him the legal power of the executor. He would give him the title, and he actually held the corpus or the body of L. Ron Hubbard's work. And one of the conditions of L. Ron Hubbard's will was that the church had to get tax exemption. And that's the new organization, Church of Scientology International, not the old Church of Scientology California.
Right.
So once tax exemption was obtained, Norman, in his capacity, and really he was a rubber stamp, he signed off and transferred the body of that work to Church of Spiritual Technology.
Right.
Some of it was assigned to RTC. And once he did that handoff, he was good to have as a figurehead, as someone who was well known. He was very involved in the CST project where they made all the stainless steel records. They put Hubbard's report.
Right, right. Because the ASI that he was in charge of, they were essentially the fundraising arm for that project.
Yeah. Yeah. So he did a lot of things. He was behind the scenes, but he most high profile as the executor of Hubbard's estate. And that gave him a great deal of credibility. Now, when Mary Sue Hubbard and the Guardian's office were purged, by Miscavige and Company,
Right.
Norman Starkey was important because he allied with David Miscavige. And because Norman had been captain of the Apollo at one time and had been associated with Hubbard, it gave David Miscavige's, who usurped the throne of Hubbard. Hubbard never appointed a successor. This was
Right.
a palace coup. But Norman Starkey convinced public Scientologists, many of whom have never heard of David Miscavige. In fact, many public Scientologists I've interviewed didn't even know of David Miscavige until he introduced himself at the LRH death event at the Palladium in 1986.
Right.
So by Norman Starkey participating, he lent the apparent perception that David Miscavige was indeed the legitimate successor of L. Ron Hubbard. So,
Right.
but in terms of your question going back, no, once Norman Starkey signed off on all the papers, and in a state you pay off bills and you
Right.
discharge all the obligations, you transfer assets, and that was in there's a family trust, AMB, and these were like the ex lawyers, hence the Lensk brothers and Lawrence Heller. Once all that was done, legally, Norman's obligations as the executor ended, and he stayed on as a Sea Org member.
Right.
And
right.
As a PR person, for example, during one of the, I think it was Going Clear, it's sometimes, and this is something I want to ask you. Norman would appear, like he did a video and he protested that a journalist, maybe it was Lawrence Wright or Alex Gibney, somebody like that wanted to interview David Miscavige. And Norman Starkey made a video that's still online in which he protested that David Miscavige was much too busy to give a common journalist an interview.
Right. He would say, it's like Miscavige would say, yeah, imagine if people wanted to interview the Pope, you think he'd give them an interview?
Yeah. And that was you mentioned, I remember asking you about that picture and, or that video that Norman did. You said it was shot inside of Bonneview, L. Ron Hubbard's house.
Oh yeah, that's right. It was. And actually the interview that I showed, the little memorial piece that I showed at the beginning of this video, that was part of that overall video, which I shot. I did that interview with Norman. I didn't include that part. I wanted to keep it short. I just wanted to introduce him to people so that most people watching this won't know who he was. But in that video, if you go and watch it, that video is on the ronmiscavigebook.com site. And
that's correct.
Yeah, in that video, Norman says unequivocally that L. Ron Hubbard chose David Miscavige and that David Miscavige was the heir apparent. Now, keep in mind, when Norman did that video, he was just let out of the hole. I mean, this guy had suffered abuse along with all the other top executives. And he's speaking like, a North Korean prisoner of war. He says, if you look close, you can see the fear on his face. So yeah, he was definitely indoctrinated into pushing this party line that Miscavige was the heir apparent, when Norman knew full well that that was just a lie.
Yeah, it would. Going back, one of the CMO who left the church early on, David Miscavige is reported to have said the best thing that could happen to the church is for the old man to die, meaning L. Ron Hubbard.
Right.
And so in this is where Norman really comes to power. He's already a known commodity. He's trusted, obviously, in the church.
Right.
So in the Miscavige era takeover with the new lawyers and the purging of the Guardian's office, this is where you had to choose sides.
Right.
If you were like an LRH era Scientologists who had entered in the 50s, 60s, 70s, you had to choose sides. And that's why a lot of the Guardian's Office people went over to a company, an insurance adjustment company, and they still worked for the church.
Oh
But
yeah, what was the name of the two? I'm sorry,
I don't really want to give it out.
yeah, yeah, okay. I'm sorry, that's
you-
fine. I think I know you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah. Go on. We'll talk about it later. Sorry about that.
initials DM. But
Okay, thanks.
so there was a dotted line to this insurance adjustment company, and Norman would do what he was told, and that was his use to David Miscavige, is that he could be trusted to not do anything and take orders. And I think that's the sign of a good Sea Org member is to obey command and tension.
Right.
That is, do whatever you want. Because I don't know how close Norman Starkey was to L. Ron Hubbard, because that was a dangerous place to be, as L. Ron Hubbard makes it close in his document or his policy letter, Responsibility of Leaders.
Right.
When you get close to power, it's a very dangerous place. So
Sorry,
Karen
Bill.
could comment better on how Norman Starkey fell in and out of favor with L. Ron Hubbard or Mary Sue.
Right.
That made it
Yeah.
that made it quite interesting. Now, the other thing they don't want is when a leading figure dies of something, that shatters the OT myth that you're supposed to be in perfect health. So to have Mr. Starkey die of bladder cancer, which is what I had heard he died of, and he was receiving alternative treatments.
Right.
Yeah, and sometimes those alternative treatments fail. I have Karen here who knew Norman.
Right.
If you want to take us off screen for a
Yeah,
minute.
yeah. I can do that.
yeah.
Actually, there's some things I want to say about Nara. So
Okay.
yeah,
Just,
hold on. There you
take
go.
us off for a minute.
Okay, so there you go. So the first time I met Norman was, first of all, I remembered when Jeffrey was talking that you may have heard about Norman during the famous Tomcat wedding in Italy, where Leah Remini said to ask Tommy Davis, where's Shelley, when she saw Miscavige's girlfriend, Larice, patting him on the butt or otherwise playing grab ass with him. But you may have also heard, obviously, when that happened, it got a lot of balls rolling for Leah. It kind of, a lot of us ended up where we are today, inspired by that whole thing, thanks to Leah. But you may have also heard that during that episode, Norman Starkey got drunk and hit on Brooke Shields, and he got in a lot of trouble for it. I think that's the first time he ended up in the hole, which I don't know why anybody should ever get in trouble for, especially an older person, like friend of the family, for getting drunk and hitting somebody in a wedding. I mean, isn't that why they have wedding receptions? So people can get drunk and do stupid shit. But, in Scientology, you get locked up and, incarcerated and humiliated for that. But I first met Norman. Hey, Jeffrey, if you can hear me when you're ready, just hold up two fingers. I first met Norman in the late 80s with the release of L. Ron Hubbard's book, Mission Earth, the 10-volume series. Now, Hubbard may never have figured out a succession plan for power after he was gone, but he figured out a lot of other things to do after he was gone, like make a rock and roll album interpreted from the book Mission Earth. So they did this album. It was the Mission Earth album, and I didn't really know much about it. I didn't work for Gold yet. I was just working in LA as a commercial director, and I got a call from someone at ASI to come in, and I met with Norman about doing a music video. There was a one cut on the album, which was called Cry Out, and it was essentially an anthem, calling for cleaning up the environment. It was called Cry Out. And what they were hoping to do was produce a music video with Edgar Winter, who at the time was a Scientologist, and use this song to form partnerships with pro-environmental groups. Like maybe they could get it played as the anthem at Earth Day and things like that. So we produced this. And yeah, so here, I'll actually. I'm not going to play the whole thing. Don't worry about it. I'm just going to kind of. Anyway, pretty much anybody who was like all of the major Scientologists appeared in this thing. Yeah, that's a little better. Anyway, so here. So yeah, this is all about the environment, blah, blah, blah. We shot this whole thing. And then towards the end, we had a bunch of people looking and noticing what was going on. Like Michael Fairman is a terrific actor we did a lot of work with. That's in the middle there. That's Marissa Ribisi, Fonnie Ribisi's twin sister, who eventually would marry and divorce Beck. I think like Karen Black is in here. Chick Corea. This guy was sold millions of records in the Philippines. He was a Scientologist. And anyway, you can search for it on YouTube. Cry Out, Edgar Winter. You can watch the whole thing. This Jeff Pomerantz, the voice of Scientology. Like everybody was in this. This Chick Corea was in this thing. So anyway, I think they're just about ready to come back on. So I have a number of stories to tell about the filming of that because Norman would come and visit us on the set. But that's the first time I met him. And he was, a very serious, very intense guy. But at the same time, he was very gracious and treated you with a lot of dignity and respect. So, but I think we're ready to go. So I'm going to bring her on. So, hey, Karen, hi. I'm assuming you're ready to go.
Yes.
Oh, so nice to see you again. Thanks for coming on. So you're going to talk to us about your relationship with Norman, the time you spent with him on the ship, your friendship over the years.
Yes. Is this greetings, Mitch? Good to be with you. We need to be one-on-one.
Yeah.
Your history is remarkable. There's no bridge. There's no Mitch Brisker. Oh boy, did you? Nobody walked in your shoes.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So I really would love to shoot the breeze with you.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, we finally met in person. We'd spoken,
Yeah.
but we finally met in person at the screening of Jeff Levin's film.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll for sure do that. I was so super excited to have a great reason to join with you on my channel. So
yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Karen.
Mitch, my pleasure. Now, just so I know what you want, is your want some only like goodness about Norman? Are you looking at like
whatever you think is relevant,
memorial or because everybody has some
yeah. I mean, I pretty much saw the good side of Norman. I mean, the most, I was sitting in my car one day waiting for the AAA. I had a flat tire. I was just outside the Scientology offices when I was working for them in the 80s. So I had a flat tire and I called AAA and I'm sitting in my car reading a book and Norman walks out and he says, "Hey, Mitch, how are you? What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm waiting for AAA. They're going to come and fix my flat tire." And he said, "Man, why don't you just fix it?" Because he was that kind of guy. He wasn't mad at me, but he was like, "What are you doing? Why don't you just fix the tire?" I mean, he was the kind of guy, he got a flat tire. He's like 10 seconds later, it would be fixed, right? Like he was just one of those people. So, but I would just like to hear anything you have to say about Norman, good, bad, or otherwise. I'm very curious about his relationship with L. Ron Hubbard.
Well, Norman could be very gracious. I was pulled out of the RPF. 6 months of torture, running around a pole, and Heber's petition was approved, and I was put into OSA Int for 5.5 years with this grand title, Presidential Aid. And Norman Starkey ordered $1,000 to be taken out of God knows whose FP, and Karen is to get a new wardrobe. Now, this is late 1980s. $1,000 went, $1,000 may not go far, but in 1980s money, it was 1,000. So Norman dreamt up, Karen needs a new wardrobe. And this was like, when does a Sea Org member get someone from So I always remembered Norman for that. But I didn't have a relationship, so to speak, with him. He was on the Apollo, I was on the Apollo. One thing, because the Class 12s had their own space with Jeff Walker and David Mayo, we more or less heard everything that went on in the ship,
Right.
one way or the other. Usually it was kept under wraps. But I did hear of the few people that Hubbard punched violently. He punched Otto Roos. He punched Belkacem Farage for having sexual intercourse with Diana Hubbard. Diana was 16, and maybe you could justify the wrath of her father having his 16-year-old having sex with a Sea Org member. So he punched Belkacem. And the third person I recall very clearly that Hubbard punched was Norman Starkey. He violently punched Norman.
Wow.
Later, he was made the executor of the will, but he punched. And Norman, Janice Grady will verify all this with you, was kicked off the ship and expelled and sent back to South Africa. Then, as time went on, he got clearance to come back to the ship, but he was expelled from the Apollo and sent back
Really?
to South Africa.
That's so interesting, because in the interview that I did with him in 2014, I think it was, which is the Ron Miscavige book.com, which is a hate site, which I was involved in. And if anybody has questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. And yes, the entire thing was micromanaged by David Miscavige. But in that interview, and in the part that I played at the beginning of this video, Norman talks about how he was, such good friends with Hubbard. He was an aide for a while. He was the captain of the ship. He was the executor of his estate, blah, 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 blah. And those things aren't always as they turn out. I mean, they're always as they're presented.
Norman's demons was the alcohol. There's a guy on a forum I run called Outer Banks, Michael Reppen, who, poor second gen, he was put in that diabolical hole, the where the ship's anchor is kept. That
Right.
at least 4 or 5 times he was ordered to the hole. Anyway, Mike Reppen's bitterness on Norman Starkey is that Norman would rub his body against his sister, who was a youngster, maybe 14, 15, and he did this numerous times, but he was drunk. So when he was drunk, his demons would have him. I mean, imagine hitting on Brooke Shields. Give a break. Jeez.
At the wedding of the decade, no less.
Yes. But this is the Norman that emerges after bouts of alcohol. And Mike Reppen has posted on Outer Banks more than once how Norman Starkey got away with a kind of pseudo molestation, rubbing your pecker when it's hard against a youngster. It's not sexual intercourse, but it's
right. That's
it's
an absolute
conduct unbecoming.
Yeah, I forgot there's a technical term for that, but it's definitely I think it's pervy is the technical term. But yeah, that's definitely a form of abuse, unwanted sexual advance.
I don't know why Norman was kicked out of the Apollo to go back to South Africa, but Janice Grady would know. She might have even covered it. It could have been for this kind of the drunken conduct. Remember, in those days, you got a day off no matter, almost always, just a day off every 2 weeks.
Right.
Hubbard allowed you to just do what he called a reach and withdraw from your post. Get away, go ashore, mix with the natives. But no one would come back roaring drunk. Because now you are, alcohol is available in the ports. And, I am so sorry. I am so sorry.
That's live TV, Karen. That's just the nature of it.
I will kill this so it won't happen again. I will kill this.
No problem.
Yeah. So we're talking about Norman.
Right.
I think he was a character. Did you hear about the incident? You were right there at Int Base for years. Did you hear about the incident of David Miscavige punching Norman to break his earpiece because he had a hearing aid, and the hearing aid actually broke in his ear canal? Did you ever hear about that?
No, I mean, I was living in my bubble probably when that happened. I mean, I knew that Norman was in the hole. I found that out later, but I did not know that specific story.
Yeah. Well, see, this is the pain and suffering of Norman. He was such a sycophant. He would just kiss ass to Miscavige. He would do whatever while he was gaslighted and being brutalized. So I feel a sadness and empathy. He was, but look at the cruelty of busting a hearing aid in an ear canal.
Yeah, in an older person, that's called elder
abuse.
Yeah.
So, but no matter what, Norman in and out of SB hole for long periods of time. No matter what, Norman was committed and radicalized and absolutely believed in. That's what's so sad, when they die and they still believing in it all.
Right.
See, this is, let me tell you some stupid thing that I've always believed in reincarnation. There's nothing to do with Scientology.
Right.
I just have certainty that I've lived before and will live again. And what I worry about, because of my own, people could laugh at this belief, but I worry that people will report back in 21 years because this has been an implanted command. You've got a 21-year leave of absence. Norman Starkey, wherever you are, don't report back in 21 years. Don't report back to punishment.
Go have fun.
Yes. Yeah. So Norman, at the demand of David Miscavige, touted something to suck in gobs of money. Oops. The titanium plates.
Right.
Now, for those who don't know or haven't always seen the history of Scientology, the Scientology cult has hidden areas in about 3 locations way underground, where they have transcribed every word Hubbard has said on titanium plates. Why titanium? It lasts nuclear blasts.
Right.
Now, Mitch.
Yes.
You got to tell me, when you live on a planet that has a nuclear blast and radiation everywhere, the one thing you're going to do instead of looking for food and water is study L. Ron Hubbard and look for plates and study the gobbledygook.
Right. Oh yeah. No. I mean, I did some work on the film preservation part of that. In other words, the film stuff that gets put into those titanium boxes that are then filled full of inert nitrogen gas and then stored in these underground vaults. And it's just I worked on a documentary that's on the Scientology network, which I really recommend people go and watch this, because you have no idea of the trouble that Scientology, the millions of dollars they've spent doing that. And they made a very detailed documentary about this that you can watch. And they're not going to capture it's totally free. They're not going to capture your IP address, nothing. Believe me, they're not going to, I know for a fact they're not going to do that. But it occurred to me, if anybody ever did find these, like there's 2 possibilities. One would be a primitive society, right? As you mentioned, a primitive society they would likely, if once they discovered there was no food inside, they would likely be fashioning these things into weapons, right? Before that, and if it was an advanced, let's say it was a very advanced society, maybe they came from another planet and they landed and they were interested in this ancient dead civilization on Earth, and they managed to dig these things up and they found all this Hubbard stuff. No doubt this would no longer reboot Scientology than when we found the ancient Egyptian tombs rebooted like a belief in Egyptian religion. When they found those, we were going, oh, the one true God is Tutankhamun. I mean, so undoubtedly, if they were found by an advanced civilization, they would wind up like in a museum of oddities. In some wing of the Natural History Museum, there would be the wing of really weird stuff. And like children would parade through and laugh at this stuff for how ridiculous it was. So, but boy, they take it deadly seriously. I remember when I was at Scientology Media Productions and Miscavige was dead set on making this documentary. And he said, you know, when we show them the trouble we go through to preserve the scriptures of our religion, people are really going to take us seriously. They're going to know we're not a scam. And even though I was working on this thing and I was committed to getting a paycheck and helping, I thought, yeah, but there's a really good chance when they see it, they're not going to think we're a scam. They're just going to think we're crazy, which is really what you think when you look at this. You're like, my God, Scientology is not a doomsday cult, but it acts like one when it comes to preserving the quote unquote works of its founders. So it's pretty crazy. I recommend you go online and Scientology.tv.
Is
and
it?
you watch.
Yeah, it's another TV series. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a documentary. Have you seen it, Karen? You ever watched it?
You know, I have watched part of that. I don't know why. I don't think I'm going to look at it with a fresh pair of eyes now that you.
Yeah,
really
because
it's really behind it.
Yeah, because it was fashioned after a History Channel series or Discovery, I'm not sure which, called Modern Marvels, where they show these amazing machines, you know, how they make Rolex watches, how BMW paints their cars, all kinds of crazy, how UPS gets packages around the world without losing them usually. And so they kind of use that as a model for creating this incredible documentary. Everything in it is true. Some things they recreated, but there's not one thing in that documentary which is a lie. It's 100% true. Anyway, so it's really nutty. People need to watch it because that's what your tax dollars are subsidizing.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, Mitch, since
Sure.
you were the man on the ground, you were right there through all of this. Did you know that the first set of all these very expensive titanium plates, the tech got all canceled? So everything had to be redone. So all the old titanium plates costing God knows what the budget was. Then that was toast. Can you make some comment on that?
Well, no, I mean, yes, when they did the basics, I mean, people don't think about this. They just, it's the cognitive dissonance. It's the disassociation. There's just some dissociation. Some things you don't think about. They live in a box and they're off somewhere. You don't think about when Miscavige released the basics, that all of the work that had been done to preserve the books, all of it had to be thrown out and redone. Personally, I don't know that they even went and gathered up all the titanium plates. Maybe they melted them down and reused them. You know, but yeah, it just keeps going. I mean, they're going to keep changing this stuff, and that project will go on forever. It'll never stop ever. They'll always raise money for it and have to change it. And the ASI, where Norman, when I met him, he was supposedly the top guy at ASI, but it was really Miscavige at that time. He just stayed in the shadows. I mean, in the 80s, before Miscavige went to Gold and became the chairman of the board of RTC, he was the chairman of the board of ASI. And even though ASI is just supposed to be this sort of separate company that, well, we're the literary agents for L. Ron Hubbard. That's what we do. But they were the shadowy seat of power of all of Scientology. It was all being run out of, well, it used to be Do you remember, Karen? It was in the CNN building on Hollywood Boulevard.
Yes.
They had a
yes.
floor in there because I was doing some work on Dynamics. I did an ad. They didn't like it and they wanted to talk to me. So I had to go into this very secretive place. And it was actually Norman's late wife,
Maria.
Maria. Yeah, it was a beautiful lady.
Yeah,
it
she
could-
was lovely.
Yeah, she's very lovely. She could be a little stern, but that's the nature of that cult. People can be, but she was the one who would push the buzzer and let me in. That's when I first met her. So
Mm.
I think that was the first time I got a sec check for her.
She died years.
Yeah,
before
it was
Norman
about.
died.
It was
yeah.
it was about. I think it was just about 10 years ago. It wasn't.
Yeah, something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
He was really devastated. They were very close. But yeah, so the whole ASI thing, and it's all tied in with the preservation of the tech, which is what they call it. And it's crazy. I mean, you guys should watch this thing. You won't believe what they have. It's not just the books on titanium plates. All of his lectures are on nickel, I believe it's nickel plated metal LPs. All of the lectures,
Mm.
right? Because these things have a half-life of like 1,000,000 years, unlike tape. And then they have a solar-powered phonograph, which will play them back. So for these either these cave people that are going to somehow figure out
After
they're going to be holding their spears. And doing,
Armageddon.
yeah.
Well,
yeah.
it's a money raising.
Oh yeah, it's great for money raising. I mean, the film, it's funny, but the film we made with Isaac Hayes, the tech film called YTRs, and it's all about the importance of learning your auditing skills, because when you die, you might end up on another planet where there's no Scientology. That's another very nutty aspect of Scientology, this idea that Hubbard introduced in this film. What if we come back on a different planet and there's no Scientology? And then we have to, the film shows how a 15-year-old kid who was, the first time we did it, it was played by a very talented young actor named Johnny Lewis. You may remember him from Sons of Anarchy. He went on, had a psychotic break, murdered his
landlord and the cat.
Landlady, both of her cats, and then jumped off a building and killed himself. And he was a wonderful kid. I mean, whatever happened to him. Yeah, so we did this film first with Johnny, but he literally, he's on another planet. He's 15, and he's like, oh my God, I have to get Scientology going. And so Hubbard is, you better learn your Scientology now, because next lifetime you could end up on another planet. If you don't remember anything, you're going to be really screwed. So there was that was a method of teaching. Isaac Hayes, who was just a wonderful guy, he was the presenter of this film. I'm not going to really get into it because we're talking about Norman, and Mark Headley and I are covering all the films. So, we're doing a making of, Karen. Did you know that Mark Headley and I we're going through all the films we did and really talking about them. It's really great fun.
It's really great.
Yeah. So, there you go.
Okay. So I have a couple of deep questions for you now.
Oh, okay.
on the titanium plates and stuff.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I can tell you what I know. I don't know everything, but I know a lot.
Okay. I have to give a little background before I launch into my questions on you.
Okay.
Scientology does not reveal for a long time to anyone that it's essentially an exorcism religion, getting rid of attached spirits. You don't get to hear. Once you're $150,000 into it, from OT3 to OT8, one level after another, you're trained to talk to, even do drug handlings on your attack, like a drug. You talk to your spirits and you find out why, this and that and the other. Now, in most religions, Mitch, you walk in the door, and church, even Church of Latter-day Saints, Catholic Church, the Bible, their believings, their booklet, their book is right there. It's free. Jehovah's Witness, and you know what they believe. The basic principles are not secret, confidential. Scientology's bait and switches, it reels you in with simple, logical, sometimes giving you a little win here and there, but the essence of Scientology, I can put in one sentence. You are not a single entity. You are 400 million jammed different spirits that haunt you, that need to be exorcised, and only Scientology has the exact commands to flush these out of you to make you whole. Now, here comes my question for Mitch.
Okay.
Since the ultimate making you the Superman, and of course, tons and tons of people who do audit the Thetans for years, they die of cancer, they get heart attacks, they kill themselves. They're not Superman or Superwomen at all. In fact,
Yeah.
they are more likely to collapse into catastrophe.
Yeah, it
than
makes
the
you very
average
fragile.
Joe
I just
Schmo.
have to interject. It actually makes you fragile. It doesn't make you into a super person.
Thank you, Mitch. So here comes the questions to Mitch. Since the most important, significant part of Scientology is flushing out your... I talk to you like this because you understand I'm one of only 8 people on planet Earth that trained to class 12 CS, not auditor. Case supervisor, managing the class 12s. So I look at it from the overall viewpoint of what is Scientology? Scientology is exorcism, which after $250,000, they will tell you the secret. And the secret is, you're nuts if you think you're only one. That's delusional. You are jammed together with hundreds of millions. So here comes the question to Mitch. Does these attached spirits and all of this and the technology of how you find one and you talk to them and say, what are you and who are you, and make sure that they vanish and blow and go pick up, as Hubbard says, they go pick up daisies and start a new life and so on. Is all of that in the titanium plates? And if not, then the essence of Scientology is not really in the titanium plates. It's bait and switch again, not
Right.
letting them know that what Scientology is really about.
Right. Well, I can tell you that they are not in there. There's a 2-part answer. One, it's not in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they've always talked about preparing them to go in there, but the problem was never solved. In other words, like I worked on a project to restore those films because the films were abysmally shot. They were, out of focus and misframed, and there were all kinds of... The films I'm referring to were not the films I made, but they were... I should mention, Karen, that back when Hubbard was running Scientology from St. Hill, and he was developing the first OT levels through 3, he filmed himself, black and white footage, very poorly shot, explaining how you did OT 1 and 2 and 3 and how you handle the reactive mind and blah blah blah. We quote unquote restored all those films, and then they were going through the same steps that they would go through with the other films to put them into the titanium vaults. Was never done. So yeah, that doesn't exist. Those people in the future will be denied. They're going to have to live with their body thetans for eternity because they're not going to have the technology. I never thought about that, Karen, but you're so right, because it's never put in there, although they were going through the steps as though they were going to do it. But even if they did it, how would they package it to say, open this first? It would be like Christmas Day. Open me first, open me second. And if you open the wrong one, you're going to get pneumonia and die. I mean, how does that work? You're absolutely right.
You see, they're still hiding what they claim are ultimate truths, and
Right.
what Scientology, because you could do all this lower level and yak yak and quacking and blah, blah, blah. But the ultimate, what they promise you, lie in OT3, the wall of fire, they call it. wall of fire.
Right.
OT3 to OT8. And yet,
Right.
this again, the bait and switch. A religion normally tells you its precepts and principles as you walk in the door.
Right.
Catholic Church, we believe Jesus died, he rose from the dead, he was
Right.
crucified, but they went, moved the boulder away, and his body was gone. He
Right.
rose from the dead. You will rise from the dead. But it's all there. Take it or leave it.
Right.
Believe in the Bible or not. But it's not hidden. It's not
No.
some secret thing that you're only eligible if RTC give you clearance to do OT
Right.
levels.
Right.
So again, the essence of what Scientology believes is essentially being hidden and being secretive, the bait and switch.
Right.
Listen to all this, but we're not really telling you what we're really about.
Right.
It's really an exorcism religion.
Right.
Now, I mean, even the Vatican, every week, a local bishop is not allowed to do an exorcism without permission from the Vatican. Apparently, it has to go up the structure, and the Vatican has to look at the evidence of why there's an evil spirit.
Right.
Why do you laugh?
They have to verify it, right? Sounds like Scientology, like before you can go clear, like it has to be verified on the meter by an authority. That's why.
When I worked at OSA and I did a couple of visits to mental institutions to look and see what psychiatry was doing to zombify its patients, we did that as a spiritual exercise kind of thing. There were people who looked demonic. They didn't even look like a normal human being. They were just, and in my belief structure, I thought, wow, this person has an evil spirit. Or evil. I believed in all of this. I absolutely believed. I had interfaces directly with Hubbard, and I viewed him as an extraordinary human. We'll talk all about that when we do our thing together, Mitch.
Yeah, we definitely should do that.
I swallowed everything Hubbard said as biblical truth. Anyway, I'm fascinated to hear from you. The long and the short of it is you're saying no, Karen.
They're not. Yeah.
The BT data is not in the titanium plates.
No, the short version is no, it's not in there. Yeah, it's crazy. I do have to just, because I've said it before, I have to just modify one thing. The Mormon church, they do have confidential material that only people who have ascended into the certain level in the temple can have.
Yeah.
But I consider like the big three cults to be Mormonism, Scientology, and the Jehovah's Witnesses. So, and they're very different. I mean, the Catholics, I mean, sure, they have their problems with various different things, but they do provide, 27% of all the healthcare delivered on the planet is from Catholic organizations. So I don't really consider them a cult, but the Mormons, I think they have some problems like Scientology have. But yeah, for the most part, religions like Buddhism, Eastern religions that don't involve you with a god, Christian religions, it's right there, man. Like someone shows up at your door and they say, accept Jesus Christ to be your savior. That is the religion. Like that's what it is. Like Scientology doesn't say rid yourself of the countless numbers of entities that have invaded your body. That's not their elevator pitch, so to speak.
I think there's fear because if you walked in the door and they let you know early on that that's what you were heading towards level by level, and if you were told that, many people would just walk out the door and say, it's not mine.
And also in terms of marketing, it's a great ploy to say there's something that you need to aspire to, reach to, expand your mind to the point where you can actually understand it. So I think it has people would absolutely leave, I think, what you say, but I think it also helps to market it. I think there's value in keeping it secret.
So back to Norman. Norman did for many years appear at the intervents. He wasn't one who was, even if he fell into disfavor behind the scenes, he was allowed to come on stage
Right.
to show stability. He was the executor,
Well, right.
L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah, he could say, and I am the trustee of the estate.
Yeah. And I think I sent you a picture of him promoting, what was the new release? Not the titanium plates.
I don't know. I didn't have time. Let me see if I can grab it. But yeah, go ahead. Like, what was it
Yeah.
exactly?
So he would come in and do these presentations.
Yeah.
And he was totally considered. I've got some pictures I need to send you of them having dinner. Miscavige's dinner circle, which always had Norman Starkey and Norman, and they look like ones he could really trust. Mark Ingber, Mark Yeager, just the inner circle.
Right.
Were you familiar with Norman's brother, Owen Starkey?
I knew him. I definitely knew him. I met him. I interacted with him, but I didn't work with him like I did with Norman.
Well, there was some sad news about Owen. Not that I've never heard that he was deceased, but that he was kicked out of the Sea Org.
I did not know that.
Yeah, he was, after 40 years of raising everything, all his energy and time to recruit people for the Sea Org and get money for the Sea Org. He was sent back to South Africa to get medical, which the Sea Org didn't want to pay for. And then I had a friend called Shelley Ashurst, who's on Outer Banks.
Right.
And Shelley's mom was one of L. Ron Hubbard's private personal secretaries. Right. And Shelley said that Owen was on the streets as a busker.
No.
Do you know what a busker is?
Yeah, a street performer.
Right. And you have a hat, and people walking by will throw in a coin or $1 or whatever.
Right.
So he was on the streets of South Africa after 40 years of Sea Org service, trying to make a dime here and there to live on, singing with a little banjo, whatever, on the streets of South Africa. But while all this was going on and posted on the web, Owen Starkey, Norman, I watched carefully. Norman's loyalty was not to help his brother, not to go, oh my God, he's on the streets as a busker. Norman, the next week, showed up at an intervent. Loyal as ever. Loyal as ever.
Well, I can tell you one of my fondest anecdotes about Norman, which also speaks to the fact that people that are that indoctrinated like Norman, when Hubbard teaches them to do something, that is the only way to do it. And they're never going to see any other way. They won't even notice it. When we were working on that cry out video that I spoke about, I don't know if you heard it, the one I did for ASI, it was a thing with Edgar Winter. It was for the Mission Earth album.
Yeah.
When I did that with him, he would often come to the set and visit because he was in charge of it. And I had hired a guy, a cinematographer by the name of Tom Del Ruth, who was noted for filming the film Stand By Me and a bunch of other features. And he was also an Emmy award-winning cinematographer. And you have to remember that Hubbard's technology was not just a self-help technology or a quote-unquote spiritual technology. It was also the technology of how to make movies, how to record sound, how to take pictures, how to clean your house, how to polish your cat. I mean, he wrote on everything. And once he said that's how you do it, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
So Norman would come to the set, and when he taught himself cinematography, he decided to adopt this obsolete type of light meter. It was so obsolete that the company went bankrupt, and Hubbard had the church buy the company, and they'd hold this meter up. It was what's called a SCI spot meter, and they'd spend minutes focusing this thing and figuring out the light read. It was very complicated. Another guy would hold up a block of chalk, like that, and the guy would focus his light meter on it. It was really crazy, and I've never seen anything like this. And this is how Norman was taught to do this, because he was the producer on the original film crew under Hubbard. And so Tom Del Ruth, he would do this. He'd pick up his light meter, he'd put it down. That was it. He'd pick it up, he'd put it down. Sometimes he'd just take a little glass and look through it, look at the sky, put it down, tell the camera operator, change the f-stop. That was it. Nothing to it. So Norman took me aside and he said, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. This is, as they say, off source, meaning it's not the way Hubbard would do it. This guy does not know what he's doing. This guy is one of the most famous cinematographers in Hollywood for consistently getting good exposures. Norman was so freaked out about it that I had to pay extra charges to rush the film through the lab, take it to a place where it could be transferred to video. And while we're sitting in there with Norman, I'm like, yeah, we're at 10 o'clock at night. I'm showing him this footage. And the guy who did the transfer from film to video, he says, I have never seen such consistent exposures in all my life. And so but Norman and I kept trying to explain to him, and he said, couldn't see it. Because once you learn the way that Hubbard does something, that's the way it's done. And you're never going to change. You're never going to go, oh, there's a better way to do it. Da, 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 da. Sometimes David Miscavige would say, why are you still doing it that way? It's because he somehow figured out something like, they were washing car windows with newspapers, which is how Hubbard said to do it. And then one day David Miscavige said, how come you guys aren't using microfiber cloth, which is a better way to do it? And so they all switched. They figured, well, he must have come across, because he's blah, 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 blah. He became the proxy, the surrogate for Hubbard. So anyway, that was my first experience with that thing of like, no, there's one way you do things. And I'm never going to believe my lying eyes if you show me a better way to do it. So I always associate that with Norman. So anyway,
he was loyal to the end.
Yeah, not just loyal as in the way he was loyal mentally. You know what I'm saying? Like
yes.
he was fixated on that
yes.
stuff. So
yes.
Okay.
Well,
I think we're going to take some questions now. I
okay.
think I'm going to look. So I've got a couple of things here. I'm not great at keeping track of these. So okay, this first one is from Jacob Harkey. Thank you for the super chat, Jacob. And he says, Mitch, were you made aware of Starkey's passing while you were still in the church? I was not. I was still in the church when he did pass, but I can't really tell you how I found this out. I think hopefully, I don't know if Jeffrey's going to come back on and we'll talk about the passing of Danny Sherman, but the person that is he going to come back on, Karen, or we're going to?
I can find him in New York Second.
Yeah. I'm sure you can.
Yeah. He lived walking distance from our home. He lived just down the road.
Danny did.
Danny in a high rise.
I know, in that lovely apartment. He was the best man at my wedding.
Oh,
that didn't work out either. So, but that wasn't because of Danny. That was because of me. The reason that half of marriages end in divorce is because one of the married people's a man. Anyway, so, but I lost my train. No, but Danny also passed away last year. The person that told me about it, who's I can't go into detail about that yet, but they were told by Danny. This person was trying to find Norman. He had every reason to talk to Norman. He was supposed to talk to Norman, and he kept asking, "Where is he? Where is he? Where is he?" And finally, Danny told him, "He's passed away. He's dead. You need to stop asking." And so then I contacted Jeffrey, and then he was able to find some actual documentation, and then I felt comfortable about it. So Jacob, that's the question. He died while I was in. I did not find out about it until about a week ago, and I needed to spend some time and actually get some confirmation. And it was this guy. Thank you very much, Jeffrey, for the super chat, and he asked, the OT levels not being in the CST vaults means that $400 million LRH left for the vaults was futile. This is mind blowing. Yeah, but can we add it to the list of mind blowing? Just there's another thing on the list, but they'll tell you that's not true, and they'll tell you that even if they admitted it, they're planning on doing it, but they're not in there. Yeah, what are they going to do? Put them in a box that says "Do not open" on fear of catching pneumonia? I mean, what the hell are they going to do? Look at the gatekeepers to getting that data that they have in to being introduced to that information. The gatekeepers are insane. You have to go through these RTC sec checkers. You have to open your whole life up. You have to, blah, 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 blah. So, and they're just going to put them in a box in a vault and say, here are future people who survived the apocalypse. Have fun. Have at it. Welcome to Scientology. Yeah, like that's really going to work. Okay. Karen, I'm so glad that you asked that question. Sometimes the most amazing questions are the most obvious ones that you never think of. Like, okay, so Joni Cummings, thank you, Joni, for that super chat. Just wanted to say hi to my friend Mitch, you doll. Okay, so I'm just like
blush.
Yeah, I'm just like red with embarrassment. Thank you, Joni. It's so good to have you as a friend. Okay, let's move on here. Steve Britton says, thank you for the super chat. I think you can pull my chat down now. What? Okay. We'll figure out what that means at some point. And we have this one again from, here we go. We've got another one, another super chat from Joni. Thank you very much. Karen and Mitch, are you two finding this therapeutic to chat with each other and us? Oh, yeah, I am. I can't speak for Karen, but I absolutely am. And I'm gonna tell you one of the reasons, and this is really funny. And I think Karen will appreciate this. Okay. I did not have a lot to do with all of the hate sites and the hate videos. I did the one on Ron, and then I'm going to do a whole episode on this, possibly with Aaron Smith Levin, to answer all these questions about these hate sites and how do they get done and who supervises them and who actually makes them. I did some editorial work on some of them, because I would be asked, can you please look at this and tell if it's okay? Because most of the writing was so horrible. One of the few, when I was working at S&P before the studio opened, one of the few that I did was on Karen. Okay. I helped them organize this hate site on Karen, and I felt really bad about it because it said terrible things, which I'm not going to repeat. They're all bullshit anyway. And not long after I got out, Karen was one of the people that I spoke with. I was very eager to speak with her because, do you remember? I felt bad, and I said, "Hey, Karen, I want to apologize." And you're like, "What hate site? I never saw it." So she
I never look at those things. They just
she didn't know about it. So.
That was so sweet that you called me up to apologize that you overstole some hate sites. That was so sweet of you.
Yeah,
Mitch.
thank you. But
that was darling of you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but your own sort of recovering from trauma, it begins with you. You have to hold yourself accountable for things that you do. Just because you were traumatized or brainwashed or whatever, you still are. You have some culpability in what you did. You may have really extenuating reasons for doing it, but and I've got to tell you, when I did that head site, I was kind of in the back of my mind thinking I'd like to meet this person someday, because they obviously they hate her so much that she's probably a really interesting person. So.
See, I was ahead of all these. Now it's incredible, all the second gen are doing videos and stuff.
Yeah,
but I was a kind of mainstay, relentlessly doing videos and exposing them, but they didn't have 100 different people coming after them like they do now.
Yeah.
So they could focus on me as the who.
Yeah.
And
you and Mark Fisher, and a few people.
Unbelievably, they leave out 20 years of Sea Org service.
Yeah.
They gave me awards. I was auditor of, there was this and that, and I given an LRH autographed e-meter,
No, they leave that out.
On and on. Married to the president of the church with extraordinary, all of that is left out.
Yeah.
And the hate video is, she was a terrible mother.
Yeah.
Blah, blah,
whatever
blah, blah.
They can dig up.
And whatever they,
Yeah,
so,
it's just ridiculous.
So, but it's waste of time.
Yeah.
So
sure.
I have Jeffrey here ready to, he can let him come on with you on the. How many more questions are there, Mitch?
Oh, there's a few, but there's one here from Pete Jensen. I want to make sure there's none for you, Karen, because I'm going to
Okay.
have to answer for you, and I don't really want to do that.
Oh, okay. Then I'll
y-
stay for. Hello,
yeah.
hello, Pete. Thank you for your nice comment. That's very kind of you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
let me read it. It says, "Hey Mitch, love your videos. You've really grown as a YouTuber. Big fan of ya. Hello, Karen. You look beautiful. R.I.P. Norman." Yeah, I didn't want you to miss that. Yeah, I mean, I worked in media forever, and I needed to do something with it. And why not help? You know, bring some truth to the world. Uh, so. And let me see this one. Da, 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 da. We have that one. So let me see. Uh, I don't think we have. I think I got. Da, da, da. I don't know. Let me just look at the non-super chats if we have any specific questions from you. And folks, please remember to. Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry, Steve. You know, I will do this. I have these elder moments. So Steve, his comment about take the thing down was before taking questions.
Oh,
I had a chat of mine up in the screen.
oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you got to remember, like I'm used to having 30 people work for me. I'm used to having crews of
Yeah.
people, and then they'll just do all this stuff. To do something myself, it's a total disaster. So, but I'm learning, and
Did you not have Goldie monitor? Did
yeah,
you
yeah,
not
yeah.
have
But she's
Goldie?
Goldie. Yeah, she monitors. She's amazing. She's like,
Yeah.
but
Was she moderating this show?
yeah, I think she is. But
Oh,
I'm not going to notice this stuff. So, but
yeah.
thank you, Steve, and everybody.
Yeah.
Please keep bugging me when I screw up because it really helps. Uh, And thank you again, Jacob. Jacob Harkey says, I've started reading more about Johnny Lewis since you brought him up. Do you know if he was still in Scientology at the time of his death or if his mental breakdown may have been Scientology related? Well, two-part question there. Now, Johnny's parents were OT8 and they were very involved in the church. His mom ran a school in San Fernando Valley for kids. His dad was a big time, field staff member, blah, blah, blah. They were very well-known Scientologists. So I have, he may not have been engaging in Scientology, but he certainly didn't leave Scientology because he wasn't going to leave his family. And I have no doubt that his involvement in Scientology had everything to do with his mental breakdown, because that is a potential outcome. And this was, oh my, Johnny was one of the most, I think he was 14 when I met him and first worked with him. And then I did this film with him when he was 15. And, his film career, if you look at the stuff he did, he's amazingly talented. And then he just loses his shit. The thing is, it's rough for kids going up in Scientology because, as I learned too late as a parent, what children need more than anything else, in my opinion, is they need a parent who says, I love you just because you're here, and I love you just because you're you. That's the basic thing they need. And you're not going to get those two things in Scientology. You're going to get, we're Thetans, and Thetans don't really have children, but I'm here to take care of you and make sure you're safe. And you need to achieve a certain level of ethics, normalcy, and then I'll love you. And if your ethics are dropped down, I'm going to withdraw my friendship. And if your ethics are up, I'll reward you. It's very transactional, the way Scientology teaches you to be a correct parenting. It's like transactional parenting, which is really bad. And that Johnny grew up that way. But thanks for the question.
Jacob, I want to give some final comments on Johnny Lewis.
Please.
People blamed that it was, drugs are common in Hollywood. He did the purification rundown.
Yeah.
And the cult promised you that you will be above the desire to flood your body with drugs. You will be drug free. You find no use for drugs. One of the EPs.
Right.
So,
and the result.
This
final
is a
result.
guy who was born and bred second generation in the cult, who did some basic Scientology, who did the purification rundown. And in this violent, crazy, maniacal fit that he got into, he stabbed his elderly landlady multiple times, brutally stabbed the cat, and then hurled himself over a building. This is a guy born and bred in Scientology with Scientology parents. But the actual shock on the internet was his father, Michael Lewis, was what we call an FSM. An FSM makes his living by getting a percentage of what the cult gets of the registration. He sends people to the cult, they reg or extort money from him, and an FSM gets a percentage of that.
Yeah, for the rest of the
So
person's life.
Michael, without losing a beat on this horrendous, catastrophic death of his son going crazy after being born and raised in Scientology, Michael was doing FSM presentations and lectures months and weeks after Johnny's death. And that was posted on different internet boards. Can you imagine a father who he was still so loyal to the cult, so brainwashed, so that he was FSMing. Now, to be fair, haven't seen a peep about Michael Lewis or his wife surface in the last 2-3 years.
No.
And I'm
nothing.
very familiar with the web and who posts what
Yeah.
and who's. I keep my finger on the pulse. So they may have phased out of it. But can you imagine parents who have a child going crazy like this, still trying to lure people into the very cult that precipitated such an incredible outcome of their child?
Yeah, and also Johnny's sister, remember, was in the Sea Org, and I've not heard about her leaving anything. So, yeah, there was this rumor going around. If you guys remember bath salts, there were these synthetic drugs. They called them bath salts, and there was a number of very vicious crimes. People who were intoxicated on bath salts had committed some very violent crimes. So there was this rumor started that Johnny Lewis was on bath salts. He'd fallen in with a bad crowd because of the Sons of Anarchy TV show, and it was all just junk. He didn't do drugs. For all intents and purposes, he should have been doing fine. But I'm sure, we are sure, it was his Scientology upbringing that absolutely killed him.
Well, they killed my son, Alexander
Yeah,
James.
yes. So I have, let me see. This might be a question for you. Japan of Green Gables says, this might be a question for Karen, but Wiki says there's an elite unit within the Sea Org called the SEALs. Sea Org recruiters are required to read Art of War by Sun Tzu and On War by Clausewitz. Karen, can you speak to that?
Never heard of the SEALs. Never
Yeah, me
heard
neither.
of that.
Yeah.
But well, I would have heard of it. I absolutely
you would.
would.
It doesn't exist.
But the second part has truth.
Yeah.
Hubbard recommended certain books.
Yeah.
And if Hubbard recommended it, that was God Almighty recommending it.
Oh, yeah.
And more than once in policy letters, Hubbard recommended Sun Tzu's Art of War. Yeah. He recommended it. So everybody bought their copy. Yeah. Everybody went to the library. If he said, read that, whoa, we followed like sheep. So, Mitch, I've got a deadline now, and Jeff is right here. Listen,
okay, great.
Mitch,
well, Karen, thank you so much.
Enchanting to have some time with you.
Yeah,
thank
likewise.
you for inviting me. Thank you, Mitch.
Yeah, no
I will
problem.
talk to you hopefully very soon. And I turn
soon.
this all over to Jeffrey.
Yeah, take care. Okay, good. I'm just going to just take him out for a second there, so we don't have to watch all the. And anyway, so I mean, the two books that he really recommended was, interestingly enough, was The Art of War and also Big League Sales. So imagine the dichotomy of those two books. Jeffrey, welcome back. You got to adjust your camera.
I know, Mitch. I have to.
Yeah,
Karen
I know.
Karen's a tiny thing.
Yeah.
And
so you're not. You're tall. When I met you in person, you're taller than me.
I know. I had a question for you when we met.
Go ahead.
At Jeff Levin's film, which I really enjoyed. When you guys were in the church, did you ever read like Tony Ortega or, any of the SP at Xenu.net? Were you guys allowed to read it?
Yeah, well, I was. My position was a little strange. Once Anonymous happened, which something we should talk about sometime.
Oh yeah.
But once Anonymous happened, and I got, keep in mind, my primary job was making the Scientology and David Miscavige's look good, not making other people look bad, right? That was other people's job. But then because it was kind of divided in two, right? I was doing the tech films and whatever exhibitions, and other people were, going after you guys. But once Anonymous happened, it was such a huge fissure. It was such an earth-shattering, monumental, explosion that pretty much anybody who was known as a creative problem solver was brought into it. So then I was brought in to that effort to push back against Anonymous. And then at that point, I started, having two roles. One was making, the church and Miscavige look good, and the other was pushing back against people and making them look bad. Although I did very little of that. Mostly I get sent like the text from a website to read and make editorial corrections and stuff. I wasn't like, there's another guy we'll talk about, a guy named Randy Stith, who was a director that I knew for years that I platformed up there, who had been my assistant director years ago. Randy became the guy he's the Dirty Tricks guy who directed all of the hate sites, and I don't mind saying his name out loud because he needs to knock it off, come out, hold himself accountable for all the crazy shit that he's done. But anyway,
is he the guy that showed up in Louis Theroux's film with Marty Rathbun?
Could have been. I don't know. I saw the film, but could have been. Yeah, could have been Randy. But to answer your question, Jeffrey, so then I was asked to look at the stuff, literally, like, I was asked to call Jason Piquet after he left and was to talk to him because he was a friend of mine. Like, I got Tommy Davis handed me a recorder and said, "The boss." I love that when they called him the boss. It was so weird because they called Hubbard the boss. And I thought that was weird. It's like a mafia thing. Once the special handshake, it's like they should have just called him the Don. It would have been more accurate. But he said, "Hey, the boss wants you to call Jason because we're trying to reach him. We want to talk about being interviewed by Matt Lauer on the Today Show, and you guys were friends, and he respects you, and so we want you to call him." He answered on the first ring, and we had a hour-long conversation. Then he called me every day for the next 3 days, and we chatted. And he never did the Matt Lauer show, and I'll take credit for it, but I don't think he was going to do it anyway. So after that point, I was like, somebody might come to me like Tommy or some of the other, I'm trying to think the other hit people, maybe Larice or somebody else, and might say, "Hey, did you hear about this thing with so-and-so, some horrible SP thing?" And if I said no, they'd be like, what the hell, man? So then I made a point of like reading this stuff so I would know, and nobody ever cared. Like, they didn't care because I was like, see if you were working on it, like where Tori Christman got started, right?
Yeah.
That's like how they asked her to. So I've written about some of the special ops I did for OSA and different things like that. So, but the funny story is about Tony, I never really paid any attention to Tony's blog, didn't really care about it. And because his stuff wasn't helpful for what I was doing, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. And because he was just kind of like writing these, what he would call juicy stories. That was a little, that was not helpful for me. But anyway, when I was busted, got in ethics trouble at S&P in like 2018, I went back to gold, and I had worked there for a couple of years. And while I was there, I was just brutally bullied, and people coming to my office every day. I mean, I had completely fallen from grace. And one day, this person who is my quote unquote boss, who, if they bring any action against me for speaking out, then this person, I'll file a libel suit against them for elder abuse and workplace bullying. And then they'll just go away because they know that they're guilty of that. So that was me talking to OSA. Okay. So just, but anyway, she came in my office one day and she said, amongst all the other ridiculous insults, it was, "You're just creating fodder for Tony Ortega." And I'm thinking, what? And I'm thinking, what is this guy writing about me? did he hear something that maybe I was involved in, and he thought he could report about it? So I started reading him because of that. So it was,
That's interesting.
yeah, and I read. That was in 2018, 2 years before I left. I think I read every one of his columns.
Yeah.
Yeah, every single one until I left.
That is interesting. I want to go back on the Norman Starkey thing.
Okay.
As a tangent, Karen asked you a really fascinating question. Are the OT materials in the CST vaults?
Bombshell question.
And
I'd never thought of that.
That for you to say no, they're not, that is one of the most staggering things I've ever heard in my time as a critic, almost 20 years. Because here's a couple things.
Right.
L. Ron Hubbard left $400 million to fund those vaults.
Right.
And going back to 1936 in a letter to his first wife, Polly Grubb, he said, as far as I'm paraphrasing, he said, the goal as far as I'm concerned is that my name lives on into immortality. My name and my works live on into immortality, even if all the books in the world are destroyed. So he had that idea. And in occult terms, the adept or the magus, whatever you want to call it kind of in a Crowleyan sense, only has his or her immortality if their words live on. So I've always seen one part of Scientology as L. Ron Hubbard's personal immortality project. And so I'll give you an example. One night, Karen and I went to see The Master.
Right.
After it was released, and we saw it at Cinerama Dome. And we were driving home down Ivar, and we stopped at Hollywood. You can see and this was like at 1 a.m. And you could see the HGB where the LRH Lifetime Museum is, that building.
Right.
Hollywood and Ivar. And I saw Hubbard's bust with the cascading waterfall behind it. And so the point is he funded all this money for these vaults. So he wanted the project when he was alive.
Right.
But two things, if the OT levels are not there, then it's all utter futility. Because the best you could do is maybe get rid of your reactive mind. Right. And secondly, when they submitted their application for their, it's called a 1023 to the IRS, Monique Yingling was in charge of this. When she was submitting the 1023 application for tax exempt status.
Right.
This was in the early 91, 92. And I have it on my site. The church admitted that the biggest risk to the vaults are from vandals and looters. So after an apocalypse, and I've said it before, yeah, you're damn right. If there's all that stainless steel and titanium, I'm melting it down into stuff I need, like tractor blades, swords, utilitarian items. I'm not going to sit around. I'm going to have to build pipe to get a water well going, and to do a lot of stuff that I need to survive. I'm not going to sit around in the post-apocalypse listening to Hubbard on a solar-powered record player.
Right.
And so, and that's just like the Great Pyramid of Giza. Was it when it was built? It was covered in limestone that shimmered in the sun. But after the decline of Egypt, other groups came and just looted. They took the limestone covering off the Great Pyramid all the way up to nearly the top. So the fact that the OT levels will be gone is such a glaring omission. It's almost mind-boggling. It's like, what's the point of putting the $400 million in? Another thing that they said, the original CST plan, they were going to build 12 obelisks around the world in principal cities of the world, in which the precepts of the way to happiness would be etched on stainless steel and then affixed to the obelisks. And as I've written, oh, what a loss. We don't have Scientology obelisks around the world.
Yeah. Yeah. The 21 precepts, take care of yourself and brush your teeth is on there.
Yeah, it's going to be in pictographic form.
Yeah.
But of course, after an apocalypse, they would use the obelisk. So I want to give one more anecdote on Norman Starkey, just to close it out. I have a friend who worked with Norman. He left the church a long time ago. And one foggy night in LA, it was an all-nighter.
Right.
They had to pull. So my friend who was in one location had to call Norman in the other. And he called up and he said, Norman, what are you doing? And Norman, And this tired voice said, "I'm working and researching for Mr. Hubbard."
Right.
It's like,
Right. Right. Yeah, he was South
but
African. That was pretty good.
but the fact that he was a true believer despite all the abuse he suffered,
Yeah.
you know,
Amazing.
that shows the hard level of commitment, you know.
But I think it also speaks to the level of indoctrination and brainwashing.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Uh,
The fanat, yeah.
yeah, that's
So
just pure fanaticism.
are we going to move on to Danny Sherman?
Yeah, we
Or what
are,
do
and
you like to
we'll
do?
just hold the questions up to later.
Okay.
I know you brought. Yeah, I do want to talk about Danny. Interestingly enough, as I said to Karen, that Danny, somebody had asked about how I found out about this, or when I found out about this, if I was in the church.
Yeah.
And this information actually did come from Danny to another person, and then to me, but only within the last 2 weeks. But yeah,
Yeah.
coincidentally, Danny, who's also gone and was also, I would have thought. I was sort of under the radar when he died, and I was really surprised that nobody called me because everybody knew that we were quote unquote close friends. I mean, he had become severely addicted to painkillers, to opiates, and I twinned with him on a purification rundown. We did that in I think 2016 or 2017. So yeah, he was very, very addicted. He was, all of those speeches he was giving, the L. Ron Hubbard biographer presentations at the international events, he was loaded on, opiates and steroids, and it's just
That's amazing.
yeah. And then eventually, Miscavige put his foot down and said, he was but even in that condition, I know this for a fact because I was with him when he did it. I watched Danny going through this trial of getting off of drugs, and during that, and being completely out of his mind, and during that time writing a 3.5 hour IS event, writing the entire event in 2 weeks.
Wow.
It's an astounding amount of work, and then that event would make millions of dollars for them. So they put up with a lot from him. And then eventually, and then not long after that, Miscavige put his foot down and said, "No, he's got to get off of drugs. This is crazy." He was brandishing a gun at staff members, and he was just like, had become very kind of just so beyond toxic. And they were really having to contain this guy. And I don't mean to speak ill of the dead because he was a friend of mine, but it needs to be known because the personality of this group needs to be, it needs to be made public. Yes, Jeffrey?
Yeah. You know the movie with the late Dennis Hopper, American Beauty? Is that it?
Yeah, was Dennis Hopper in that? No, I don't think Dennis Hopper.
Well, no. What was the movie? And I may have it wrong. Where Dennis Hopper played Frank Booth.
Oh, Frank Booth.
You remember? Yeah.
No,
Frank Booth.
I don't.
Oh, it's.
But I'm going to look it up real quick.
Yeah, I believe it was. Because this, I want to make a point while we're going to look it up. Oh, Blue Velvet.
Oh, Blue Velvet. Yeah, that was quite a while ago. Yeah, that was David Lynch. Yeah.
Well, the reason now there's a character in it, Dean Stockton.
Yeah, I love that film. Yeah.
Okay, now I always just watching from the outside as a critic. You remember the scene where Frank Booth comes to see Dean Stockton's character and says, "You're so fucking suave."
I'm trying to remember who the Dean Stockton character. I remember.
Well, he's the guy in the coat, and he's singing into the shop light. If you put in
hold
Frank
on a second.
Blue Velvet, Dean Stockton.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the.
He sings "In Dreams You're Mine."
Yeah, boy, you remember this film so much better than I do.
Well,
and I love the film.
Well, the point is, for those that remember the film, Dean Stockton, he sings "In Dreams You're Mine," but he's singing into a hanging shop light from a garage.
Right.
And Frank Booth says, "You're so fucking suave." And I posted that saying that's what David Miscavige is, Frank Booth. And Dean Stockton's character was, Danny Sherman.
Oh, are you
And I
talking about
remember,
the actor, Dean
well, the
Stockwell?
role that they played.
Yeah.
So
So
Kyle
yeah,
MacLachlan's in it, and
right.
they go over to Ben's house. So he plays Ben.
Right. Yeah,
And
okay, I remember now. Go ahead. Yeah, no,
okay,
yeah,
so
so
to set that up, I see David Miscavige in one sense. It reminded me of a wild, erratic Frank Booth character.
right.
Where he's inhaling the gas and he's a freak, but he thinks that Ben
Right,
is so suave
right.
like that. So in some way, Danny Sherman, and correct me if I'm wrong, I got the impression that Danny Sherman set the standard of what style and elegance was for David Miscavige. And the reason
Yes and no, but go ahead. That's a really interesting observation because it's not totally incorrect.
well, the reason I asked you, I was asking you, we were chatting, and I said about David Miscavige, I thought that he was a dramatizing interior decorator, and he'd often fondle swatches
Right,
of carpet and obsess
right,
over. And you made the remark that he didn't have any taste; he learned it from
right,
others.
right.
So, how much of of David Miscavige's aesthetic did he borrow, or was informed by, or given to him by Danny Sherman?
Well, you put me in a really awkward position here because
Great, that's what we want on interviews.
Yeah. No, you did really well. You're like Barbara Walters. You're just making me squirm. Where do you see yourself in 10 years, Mitch? To which Kirstie Alley gave the best answer ever,
Is that-
thinner. But anyway, no, it's an awkward position because I was like Danny's stylist fashion-wise.
Wow.
Okay, I was because Danny was a frumpy guy with a mullet, and I would turn him on to different, I had a guy who was a stylist who, back then when I made a lot of money and blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. And before I was broke, I had to experience both of those in my lifetime. I just remind me next lifetime to do broke first, not
Yeah.
second. It's just better that way. But
And that's what
anyway,
I did.
yeah,
I
you're
did
smart.
it that way.
Yeah, I'm still hoping I can do, broke, well off, and I mean, anyway, whatever. I can get back there. But no, so like I had a guy who was a friend of mine who was a stylist, wrote a fashion blog, who I became friends with. A guy who worked at a very noted men's boutique that used to dress like the Rat Pack, used to dress Presley. The guy who invented, his name was Cy DeVore, and he literally invented the mid-century look with the black suits and the skinny ties and the way that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that look. This guy, and he's been dead for years, but he still has one of his relative. There's still somebody from his family
Yeah.
involved, but they have a shop.
Like the Don Draper look.
Yeah. This was a guy named Cy DeVore. You could go ahead,
Wow.
Google him,
Yeah.
and you will see all the Rat Pack, and you'll see how all these guys dressed.
Oh,
So
cool.
I used to dress in this boutique, and I became very good friends with a guy. He does no longer work there. He's off doing other interesting things. A guy named, and it doesn't really matter, but and so then I turned Danny onto this. This guy, they used to do all of his tuxedos for the events, and then they started sending CMO people into this store, and like women in full Sea Org uniform to buy gifts for people, and so a lot of that kind of came from me. And then because I was plugged into that kind of stuff, and then there was this other girl, I can't think of her name, who was one of the stewards, one of Miscavige's stewards. And then she would be responsible for like researching fashion and stuff. But her big thing was that I hated this guy, that designer that used to be, got endorsed by Keith Richards. What the hell was his name? A rock and roll designer who made all these expensive clothes. And so, they used to wear some of his stuff. And then, of course, Miscavige, I think I mentioned this to you. He had this Bible of men's style, which was called Clothes and the Man, written by a guy named Alan Flusser, who was famous as the guy they brought in Oliver Stone's film Wall Street to decode the way that men dress on Wall Street. It's coded widths of ties, colors of ties, types of suits. It all has meaning and codes. and there's a certain standard and level of perfection. Alan Flusser is the guy who was an expert on all this, on men's fashion. And so then Miscavige was given this book, and then that became his Bible. And then he got turned on to this very noted Mr. Lim, this tailor that made all of his suits.
Oh yeah.
So it was all like, he didn't have any taste. Like he was fashionable. A person that's fashionable is a person with money who shops on Rodeo Drive. A person with style can go into Gucci and then go into and then go into a thrift shop and come out
Right.
with something nobody's ever seen before, and it becomes noted. That person has style. Okay, so
Yeah.
so Miscavige
Yeah, I
and
mean-
his group, they were fashionable. They had money. They just bought stuff.
Sure. So I've known in my time, spending 30 years in, I started out in general lighting, and I did some retail stores. Like I did the
Right.
early, I helped work on the early, some of the retail where you'd have the wall of monitors and things.
Right.
Like Wet Seal. What was one of my clients.
Oh wow.
And I watched
they
their
were that
aesthetic.
was huge.
A lot of well, I was involved in lighting, and then I moved on. And lighting had a lot to do with style, so I was always in retail stores.
Oh, absolutely.
and I would
Lighting
borrow-
was like, that was the make or break on interior design.
Oh yeah, on halogen and angles and
Yeah.
things. But what interests me, Mitch, about you is watching Scientology from the outside, and I've narrated a lot of it. I told people a long time ago I felt like I was the narrator in the Divine Comedy, taking people on a tour of the underworld, Scientology underworld.
Right.
And
That's so funny, Jeffrey.
so you are one of the creators of image and perception. And as I watch
Mhm.
what images and projection, because when you're in lighting, look, I worked in retail, then I moved into motion picture lighting as part of my portfolio, and then scientific lighting. But when you work in lighting, it very much has to do with design of
Right.
buildings, of retail, of perception.
Right.
And you're actually controlling people through the movement of space, interior, in retail stores and casinos.
Yeah,
So as I
controlling
watch-
their movement and their mood. Like
Well, yeah.
emotionally, you're controlling them.
You can control you can control so much. So as I was looking at Scientology publications, I was always interested in what are they communicating. So I was interested in people like you, who I didn't know, the creators of perception, of how Scientology wants itself to be perceived.
Right.
Because in the L. Ron Hubbard era, and even into the David Miscavige era, a lot of the photographs in the magazines are so robotic, stilted, and posed. You would have these very, almost like mannequin, like L. Ron Hubbard wanted like these stupid mannequin almost shots. And then the one comical thing he did, where you remember that the publication L. Ron Hubbard made about SPs, where you had the chef poisoning the diners.
Mhm.
It's just comical. And L. Ron Hubbard had all the fake blood. There was apparently one film session he did where he wanted so much fake blood, and they were using Caro syrup with food coloring,
Yeah.
and it would just stick to their hair. But so when you go to aesthetic, and I'm talking about Danny Sherman as a wordsmith, as a writer, where did Danny, because it could be, so I once tried to copy Danny's style, and I wrote a sentence of over 500 words. One sentence, and I have it, and I can post it, of over 500 words.
I'm going to make you come on and read it.
No, I will be glad to post it and read
That's really
it.
funny.
But Miscavige, at an event, he would have the art of saying as much as possible, saying almost nothing. Furthermore,
Yeah.
moreover.
Yeah,
And-
moreover, that was my Danny drinking game word. Every time you said moreover, you just like took a drink.
That was a favorite word, moreover, whereupon we
Yeah.
were embarked on. And Miscavige would
Yeah.
do this staccato delivery, which was his.
Right.
But Danny must have gone through the thesaurus. Some of his words were unusual. Also, his penchant for embellishing L. Ron Hubbard's resume. So he had to do a
Yeah.
lot of things. He had to write Dave's speeches. He had to embellish L. Ron Hubbard's resume and make ridiculous claims like L. Ron Hubbard created the United States Air Force. That was one of the more outlandish
Yeah.
claims.
There you go. Yeah, there was an Air Force because of him. Yeah.
Yeah, because L. Ron Hubbard wrote a letter. so of course President
Yeah.
Roosevelt said, well, here, let's create an Air Force. Nobody
Yeah.
wants it. So now you're behind the camera, which is
Right.
a really powerful place to be.
It
So these
is.
people are in
Yeah.
front of the
I'm
camera.
literally being Lenny Riefenstahl for David Miscavige. So
That's an interesting way to put it. So it's
yeah,
like you have to put it inside the viewfinder.
yeah.
And so Danny's creating the words. There's people like Henning Bendorf creating some of the aesthetic.
Well, yeah,
Because-
but I apprenticed him. I mean, he was my
Did he?
protege. Yeah.
He's your protege?
Yeah,
Okay.
when he was 22 years old, his senior jumped the fence, as we used to say, and disappeared. So I grabbed him and I said, "We got these films to make. It's just you and me." And then I actually got him with a guy named Alan Jones, who'd worked on Star Wars, a very famous art director. And then they had a fax machine going up between Malibu and Gold, and Alan helped to apprentice him. Yeah, Henning got a lot of special treatment and ended up being a very talented designer. But yeah, it was.
Well, Mitch, since you're one of the architects of the perception,
Yeah.
what were your principles? What were you trying to communicate? Were you
Principles,
allowed freedom?
Oh yeah, a lot of freedom.
I'm like, in your mind, when you're designing and you are, because Scientology is created. It's what Scientology says it is, what it projects.
Right.
So when you have that kind of freedom and power to project, what were your aesthetic design principles?
Well,
Like, what did you have in mind to project Scientology to the world? I'm really interested.
I'll tell you. Okay, basic
Yeah.
principle. I'll tell you a basic principle, and this was something worked out with originally my idea, which was then ratified by Miscavige, and then he made it his idea, and because that's what eventually happens.
He's the boss. Yeah.
Well, eventually, you stay at work for Scientology long enough, you get humiliated, you get traumatized. All of your work, other people get credit for it, and you get blamed for shit you didn't even do. But the basic principle was we were going to produce work which in and of itself, by virtue of its aesthetic and technical execution, would command respect for Scientology. That was the basic principle. Okay. That was like the guiding principle. That was first thing on the whiteboard. You get it? Was like the work in and of itself will command respect for Scientology. So that was my goal. And as I said to a friend of mine, actually, I said this to Caroline Mustard, who I recently had on my channel. She was a very high-ranking marketing executive who hired me to work for the church originally on the Dianetics campaign. And she was kind of asking me the same thing. And I said, well, Carolyn, the reason I was always so fascinated with Lenny Riefenstahl, and I'm going to talk a lot more about her in the future, was because like her, I felt that I put my aesthetic principles before my morality. And I think that's an important thing. That's a thing I really had to work out, because I was intensely interested in my aesthetic goals. Like, what can I create with all of these wonderful tools? And then the more Miscavige built that $8 million castle. Like, whatever reason they say they built that castle, they built it because I got so many films done. He said, I'm going to build you a bigger studio. Because, so it was like I was at the middle and the center of all that stuff, until I wasn't, because eventually, everybody gets freaking brutalized. It's like, I'm laughing about it now, but it's still very much in my space. I think that partially answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, but it's interesting, to be on the other side of it. You're wanting to build films that you're wanting to build products that command respect for Scientology.
Right.
And on my side of things, I'm deconstructing these, and some of the things even get mocked.
Well, absolutely, like the Super Bowl ads.
Well, not this is Super Bowl ads. Like, particularly, I think David Miscavige's stage sets became larger, more grandiose.
Yeah, you can't blame me for that. I had nothing to do with it.
I'm just giving you an order.
Yeah. I can speak to that.
A lot of the films you did, the public never got to see.
Right, because
they were just
films and so
they were just like. We didn't get to see tech films.
No.
So we can't judge the quality of that. The magazines were very interesting because once Miscavige built his new printing factory down there in City of Commerce,
right,
the quality came up quite a bit. The quality of the paper, the print, the inks, so everything was technically perfect from a printing perspective. And I did work in printing, what's called photochemistry. The company I worked for, we built the infrared lamps that would do photopolymerization that would harden ink on the big Heidelberg presses.
Right.
Because lights and photonics take you everywhere. But the point is, the magazines still was somewhat robotic when you would look at pictures of flag. They were very posed. How much did you do a lot of the still photography, or were you just
No,
film?
I didn't. But I can tell you one thing, going back to what you said earlier about these stilted photos, right? I used to, I did actually a piece of work I'm really proud of, and I wish I had a copy of it. It's the clay table auditing picture book. And the photos in that book, I don't know where the book is. I'll try to get a copy. It's like an art book. I made this thing like it was a coffee table art book. And it's a fantasy thing, and it shows all these scenarios. It's hard to explain. I'm not going to even try because it would take too much time. But
No, there's some products that are very good. I was doing some research. Can you hold on a minute?
sure.
Let me just get off camera for a minute. Okay. Now I'm working with a researcher on, and I'm going through some of the actual things that Scientology has made. I'm going to put this in the frame. And
Oh, yeah.
you see this?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a special edition.
Yeah.
What is that?
It's called The Wrong Thing to Do Is Nothing.
Oh, that's an IS thing. They must have put that out for an event and given it out to people.
But look inside. Now, this is something I'm talking about with style and aesthetics. It's gold.
Right.
It's a gift book and a presentation case. Very high quality. And it's old IAS. You have a picture of Hubbard there.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I think Miscavige did do right is he improved the actual physical quality. Now, this was an older piece with a cassette in it.
Right.
Mark Headley has really funnier than hell stories about how they're still making cassettes and CDs, long after the need for them was gone. Like his stories about the cassette line. Mark is hilarious on that.
Yeah.
So there was an improvement in the quality, like the book binding and everything went up.
Right.
But still, it's always interested me how Scientology wants to present itself, but what in the media, how it really comes across, because they can't counter Western media coverage of people blowing, escaping, David Miscavige beating his staff. All the violent behavior, and all the stories that come out from ex-members.
Right.
So were you ever assigned how do you counter that, or do you just keep creating an aesthetic?
Well, the
What
idea,
does Scientology do?
I tell you, the idea is obviously they never address those issues head on because there's a Hubbard policy that says you attack, you never defend.
Right.
So speaking to those things would be thought of as defensive, right?
Right.
They'd be defending themselves. So the idea was to keep creating, okay, look, if you look at The Way to Happiness, Hubbard's, common sense guide to morals, there's a thing towards the end. It's called flourish and prosper. So in the face of suppression, like when you're being attacked by SPs, and he's saying even in your life, when people are attacking you and they're saying you're no good and they're sabotaging your opportunities and whatever kind of attack you're under, the way to beat those people is to flourish and prosper yourself. Now, I can't really argue with that as a principle. And they don't always do that because sometimes rather than flourishing and prospering, they take the people that are attacking them, especially if they're internal, and they brutalize them. But so the idea was, you want to know what we have to say about the whole? I'm opening up 4 orgs in the first quarter of next year. Okay. I'm not kidding, Jeffrey. So
no, I understand.
That's our
what
answer.
it is.
You think we're a cult? Look at this building that we just built. Look at how beautiful it is. Look at the happy public that I bust in from 100 miles around, so it looked like it was crowded. That's who we are. Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's interesting.
that's the whole principle. It's
Well, the
flourish and
element of
prosper.
distraction, you know, in the WOG world, flourish and prosper, we just say that success is the best revenge.
It's
So
basically the same principle.
so I just made a killer stock move. I mean, it some good money, you know, on a stock, and because I like to trade stocks, I
Right.
don't like to own real estate like Grant, and I chuckled because of some of my detractors. I'm thinking, oh, if you know what I just did, and I'll often talk about money. I don't like to, but the point is, like, out here, it's organic, and anyone can get in and, you know, criticize Scientology or expose it or do blogs. And
Right.
Scientology will never address it because they can't afford to. So they have this wing of the church that we call hired cult apologists, like Massimo Introvigne with Cheshire. Complete
Oh,
horror.
you
Complete
mean
horror.
you mean like the so-called religious experts, the scholars,
Yeah,
those people?
the paid cult apologists. It's like
Yeah. Okay.
Scientology would outsource that, and
Right.
then they outsource stuff to PI, to lawyers, to PI firms, to the dirty
Right.
PIs and the fair game operations.
Right.
So they have paid cult apologists, PIs to do their dirty work, and
Right.
then they have OSA like steering the witch's brew. I apologize for that. That's not the right word.
No, but
I
it's
like
perfect. The picture's perfect.
well, no, because I have a respect for Wiccans, so I apologize. They're stirring the toxic brew of hatred.
Oh, okay.
And
There you go.
it's so stilted and it's unbalanced because you can't be a vicious, mentally insane cult that's at war with culture and also at war with itself internally and try to project an image of success. In other words, the real estate doesn't answer to the more fundamental problems that culture perceives.
Right.
So I've always seen Scientology as asynchronous with culture, though it can parrot culture, like Hubbard was a parrot. He any scientific word he heard he would pick up. And I
Yeah.
used to see a lot of things that were trying to be like culture. And so, but see,
Right.
you're a real artist, Mitch. You're the real thing.
Oh,
But like you said,
thanks.
you put your aesthetic talents before your morality. So
Yeah, I
that
get to say that. You don't. No, I'm
no,
just
I'm
kidding.
saying
I'm
I'm
just,
repeating what you told
yeah,
me.
yes, that is true.
But now the service you can do is talk about how you construct it, and that's why I wanted to know what your prime directive was, and it was to do things that commanded respect for Scientology, like what worked and what didn't work, and I mean, did
Well,
anything really
that's
work?
yeah, that's the secret sauce. Yeah, I
Ha-
mean, we are you saying that nothing worked from your
No, I know.
perspective
I'm
outside?
asking you, but by your own survey, in your opinion, what really was successful and what wasn't successful? Because
Well,
I'm only judging. I don't have that.
I think, well, internally, the tech films were very successful. Externally, I mean, the first orientation film I did was a total disaster. We can't say that that was successful. The remake of it, well, at least it wasn't embarrassing.
You mean the one with Larry Anderson?
Yeah, yeah.
Was that the remake or the first?
No. That was the first one. That was the first time it
Yeah,
was ever
I
done.
thought that was a good film for what it was.
Yeah, except for the remake is way better. We got rid of an on-camera guy because we didn't want to worry about having some guy blow up and go to the,
Mm.
speak out. So we got rid of that. But, I mean, do you mean physically what worked in terms of the projects, or hold on a second, or did you mean conceptually in terms of the principles, what principles
Well,
work?
conceptually,
Yeah.
yeah. What themes or what things were conceptual drivers that were successful that kept people inside the church,
Well, nothing worked externally,
right?
because the Scientologist reputation has just sunk. Eventually, and enough good people, myself, I could count myself among those, were so badly treated and misunderstood that they had to leave. So externally, it didn't work at all. What Miscavige is left with, he's left with a group of, I've heard, 25, 35,000 people, many of
Yeah,
which are very wealthy. I have something here. I have a picture of all the wealthy people. You want to see it, Jeffrey?
sure.
No, I would have to scan it. Here they
Yeah,
are. I would have to scan it. I don't have time to do that now.
no, but
This recently, I don't know why they sent this to me. You see the people on this cover. Can you actually see that there's
Oh yeah,
a crowd of people
Sicily.
there?
Yeah.
Yeah, you
it's
know about this
actually
little
the time.
caper they did?
No, well,
This
I
is
know the magazine, but
yeah, this is in support of L. Ron Hubbard Hall, right? Which is an auditorium they want to build in Clearwater. They're raising money for it. It was the last job I worked on, some pre-visualizations of this auditorium, uh, and the last job I was offered by them, a substantial paying job, which was during COVID, was to fly down to Clearwater and help design the museum dedicated to L. Ron Hubbard that would go within the hall. I was done with them at that point. I just wasn't saying it. So I said, I don't feel comfortable flying during COVID. And they said, no problem. We'll charter a jet. There'll be nobody else on it but you and the pilots.
wow.
It's like they really wanted it, but I still said, no way. I'm not going to do it. At this point, my moral judgment had caught up with my aesthetic goals because I wasn't making my aesthetic goals. Eventually, it's just like it's all bankrupt. So
Yeah.
then your moral judgment catches up with you, right?
Yes.
That might be kind of a heady statement if you haven't experienced something like that. But anyway, I got this in the mail. These are the people. I haven't counted them, but all of these people are multi-millionaires. They all donate lots of money. They donate so much money that the church even takes them on a junket to a beautiful place in Italy, and I don't know why they did that, but you can anyway. I'll scan this and
Yeah.
if you want. I don't know why they sent it to me. There's some little unit somewhere that hasn't gotten the note yet that they need to
Well,
stop.
if they all went to Sicily, maybe they were meeting with Cosa Nostra. Who
Yeah.
knows?
They might be. They might be having secret mafia talks.
Anyway,
Yeah, I mean, if you'll become friends with the NOI, why not the mafia? Although I don't know, but that might not work out.
yeah.
So anyway, what I was saying was what Miscavige was left with was this group of people, right? And
Right.
this very wealthy, some very small group of people. Not everybody's in there. Tom Cruise isn't in there. He gives a lot of money. There's some people that
Yeah.
aren't in there. And then you have rank and file, which I think is probably segments into people that really don't have a lot of money. And they're hoping that they're going to prove their lot through Scientology and have more money. So they're willing to go into debt a little bit because they've been led to believe that in Scientology is an investment and they're investing in themselves and they'll make the money back. Is that my dog? No, I don't know what that is. Anyway, so they had this group of people. And so then what you have to do is you have to market to them. You have to keep them believing that you are expanding and that Scientology is doing good things in the world. So you make ads that are like indecipherable. They're ponderous. The language is so dense.
Yeah.
They make no sense. You make these ads and you put them on the Super Bowl. You call them Super Bowl ads, but they're not because it used to be a Super Bowl ad ran one time on the Super Bowl, like the old Apple 1984 ad.
Sure.
That
yeah.
ad was only shown one time. People were mind blown when they hear that.
Yeah.
It was only shown on television one time. That was a Super Bowl ad. Those rules have kind of lightened, now they
Sure.
But because of the internet, you only need to show an ad on the Super Bowl once. And if it's good, it gets shown 100 million times everywhere else. So those ads, they make no sense to the public. I know I did a lot of those ads between 2013 and 2017.
Well, the one ad that I knew they were trying to communicate is they promoted Scientology as the intersection of science and spirituality.
Yeah, I worked on that one, but that's
And
Hubbard's for that.
Yeah, and I think that was positioning that the e-meter was a scientific instrument that could access the spirit. And
Yeah, well,
I guess,
the
well, I
e-meter-
guess because
sorry.
I've studied I didn't go ahead.
No. I'm sorry. I've spent so much time swimming in those waters. I mean, yes, the e-meter is thought to. There is. Okay, so let me see. How can I explain this? I've given this a lot of thought because I did the orientation film and I had to decode. I've written a book. I've had to decode a lot of this stuff, and a lot of it is in there. There is a scientific basis for Scientologists believe that there is an absolute scientific basis to Scientology. Okay, it doesn't matter what you study, Jeffrey. It's what they believe, right?
Sure.
They believe that there's a scientific basis. They have a scientific basis for their prejudice against the LGBTQ plus, right? This is based, their hatred against gay people is based on the science of the tone scale. It's science.
Yeah.
The existence of body thetans that are attached to your body, this is not some otherworldly exorcism. It is, in literal terms, it's exorcism. Like Karen said, it's an
Sure.
exorcism religion, and it is. But to a Scientologist, the discovery of Xenu and the body thetans, by the way, somebody needs to start a band called Xenu and the Body Thetans, because that's an incredible name for a band. And but that discovery, that's as real to them as like dinosaurs are to a paleontologist. These are
Sure.
great. These are great discoveries. These aren't like leaps of faith that one has to take. Like I could go on and on and on about that, but yeah. But I'm sorry.
No, well, I mean, I've done extensive work on the history of the e-meter,
Right.
and I was going to launch part 5 to summarize it all. And essentially, the e-meter is agnostic. All it can read is galvanic skin resistance, or now what they call electrodermal response. So it doesn't care. You could use an e-meter in any frame of reference, a Christian, a Jew, an atheist. It's only going to read galvanic skin resistance. And so whatever interpretation you put upon that movement of the needle is purely subjective. But all I'm saying, that positioning of intersection of science and spirituality, it's something that everybody wants to say, that a lot of New Agers want to have. They use the word quantum a lot. That's like way overused. And when they named the e-meter the quantum mark, the quantum was before this one they're using now. I know what they're trying to do, but it doesn't connect, because like you said, one thing that you can't buy, even with all the money in the world, is a new reputation. So because of the reputational damage, you are, I guess, you wind up marketing to the chosen frozen, you call them, the people that are still in and still want to believe that it's scientific.
Right.
Now, one thing that Karen mentioned, and you guys were talking about, if Scientology, if you walked in and they told you that it was body thetans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Me having grown up in the Pentecostal church, they're quite open about people can be demonically possessed, and some variants of Pentecostalism are very heavy on demonic possession.
Right.
They literally believe that everyone has some kind of demonic oppression, possession, and I wish I had this video up. I was watching it the other day. This young lady talking about she was a Christian, and I grew up where exorcism was just an article of faith. You could have a demon. I seen exorcisms. Some I never talked about is my uncle. He's not my real uncle. He's a friend of the family. He's still around. He's very old. He was in his day one of the most famous non-Catholic exorcists in America.
Right.
Pretty intense guy. So Christians talk about it outright, and they're not ashamed of it. And in fact, the Christian scriptures say, Apostle Paul says, don't be ashamed of the gospel. And he also says the preaching of the cross is foolishness to those that perish. So Christians get an education to be unapologetic about their core beliefs, demonic possession, and faith, the blood of Christ and so on. So I've always wondered why demonic possession and exorcism has been around for as long as human spirituality.
Right.
And the only thing is that Hubbard, because he linked his to a specific event in time, incident 200T3,
right,
he has to do that, in my opinion, to have a copyrighted source from whence all demons come. He has to have traceability,
right,
to keep it within his copyrighted format. So if he didn't have incident 200T3, which is hard to believe, that as compared to, like, let's say, original sin. So as I play with these things, the summation of it in the intersection of science and spirituality, and I know about the O2 levels, but the public doesn't. It's just fascinating to bounce this around my head with you because you created that. You helped create it. Who did the message come from? Who wrote the Super Bowl ad script? Did you help write it?
Mm-hmm. I
Well,
wrote
now,
them. I mean, the ones that I directed, I wrote. I will say,
you actually wrote them?
yeah, I will say, yeah, I did. Actually, one of my inspirations was for the kind of free-form words, the sort of very free-form words, was Alan Watts, believe it or not. But,
Oh, I can see that. We grew up in
yeah.
the same era, but you know when you have the meter, you had the meter and you have the needle sweep.
Mhm.
That was a good camera shot.
Yeah, yeah.
That was
No,
a
I mean,
really
they're well produced. I mean, it's
yeah.
no, I mean, the one thing I think the second Super Bowl ad, the first one I produced it, I didn't direct it. The kid who directed it got in a boatload of trouble because he refused to show the e-meter because he thought it was a huge mistake. Because Miscavige said, "No, we're just going to show it." Everybody's saying, "Oh, the Scientologists they have the secret device," and he's like, "Screw them," uh, screw them. Put the meter in the ad. He's kind of a rough and tumble guy from South Philly, so he's going to always talk like that unless he's talking to outsiders at an event. But yeah, screw him, man. Put the goddamn thing in there. We'll just show. Then they'll have to shut up about it, which was true. People kind of started shutting up about the meter, or at least it took the conversation out of they have this thing they don't want to talk about. This kid, who's a very good director, young guy who I brought up into gold, he's like, "No, I think that's a huge mistake." So he got, yanked out of there and got handled. And then I just worked with him and we put the meter in because I'm like, yeah, like I was totally on board with this idea of like, I show the meter. It's like, what the hell? Why not? Plus, if it was a bad idea, I would still want to try it just because I'm a little reckless, right? I don't like, you know what I'm saying? Plus, Miscavige had put so much trouble into making that meter. He was so invested in it emotionally and financially that he wants his meter. Hey, the dude wants his meter in an ad. God damn it, put his meter in an ad. That was kind of my attitude about it.
Yeah.
So
Well, another question to that exact point, because I have read the patent on the new meter, and I
yeah,
know Russ Bellin was involved in CST,
yeah.
and I read the patent. I know what it can do. Would you say that the internal focus in Scientology is on David Miscavige, and the external focus is on the e-meter and auditing? Would that be fair to say?
No, I don't think
No.
that. I don't think that.
How do you see what's the internal focus? Because it seems to be on fundraising and David
Yeah,
Miscavige and the IES.
the internal
Yeah.
focus is on the Ideal Org program, and on the idea that Miscavige is being true to his role as the heir to the throne, as the proper heir to the throne, and that he's the one that's going to go through and make sure that all of the quote unquote scriptures, which we never called them scriptures ever until all of a sudden Scientology had to be recognized as a religion for tax exempt, and then all of a
Sure.
sudden we were parishioners. The books were called scriptures. But that's the internal focus. It's not like the e-meter is on one focus and and Miscavige, I mean, he doesn't even have to tell people why he's doing things. He doesn't have to explain it. He can just do it and they're like, wow, Dave did it. So, and we know he has a special connection to everything. I mean, he will explain it, like his explanation for redoing the basic books. He'll explain it in great detail. And they really did go through all those books.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
really did find all the punctuation errors, and they found different pieces of them which suggested they were out of order, but they still guessed at a lot of it, and it was based on his judgment. So he's kind of seen, like, I mean, I got to tell you something. I just thought of an anecdote that might help explain it. Shortly after I got out, and I was still under the radar, I have a very dear friend who I lost her friendship because I can't talk to her anymore, right? Because obviously, yeah, this happens to everybody. There's just some people you just got to go goodbye. And I had gotten this person into Scientology. She worked for my family. She's very talented. And I'm not going to say her name, but she's an actress and she's a professional costumer in Hollywood. She's in the union. She's was one of the women that was auditioned as a potential wife for Tom Cruise. And when I was leaving and I was really in deep trouble, I was emotionally, I wasn't doing well. Physically, I wasn't doing well. I really collapsed when I realized I had gone so far in my career. And
Excuse me.
yeah, no problem. And I was just in a really bad place. I reached out to her just as a friend, and I kind of tried to tell her, look, I mean, she was in films that I did. I got her to Scientology, and I really thought I need to help this person understand that we were all fooled. We were all duped by this amazing con game. And so I started to tell her some of the abuses that I had myself experienced and witnessed at Gold. And I didn't say any names other than mine. And her first reaction was, "You good?"
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm fine. Yeah.
Her first reaction was, does COB, meaning Dave, does he know about this? Does Dave know
Wow.
about this? And I was like,
Hmm.
I couldn't take that next step and tell her, yeah, he knows about it. He was the one doing most of it. I
Wow.
couldn't, because it wouldn't have worked. It would have,
Hmm.
yeah. And then she then wanted to keep this conversation going with me about the fact that I was obviously disengaging from Scientology, and she was she was kind of pleading with me, Mitch, there must be some way that we can make this go right. There's people we can tell. And I didn't know how to explain to her, no, there's no mechanism to correct these kinds of errors in Scientology, because the people who are in charge are the ones that are creating the chaos and the abuse. It's completely out of control. There's a bubble, and inside this reality distortion field of this bubble, there's these people living. We market it to those people. These people, they believe that he's the second coming of Christ, and whatever he does is perfect.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like I know. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not.
So there's a period. Yeah, I mean, you obviously go through despair and desolation, and then move into desolation. And
Yeah, no, I'm just laughing because the chapter in my book that's about me leaving Scientology is called "Hurtling Towards Despair." Okay,
yeah.
so
No, I mean, I understand the complexity of having your I don't want to get into big words. Your ontological structure, your belief system, your identity shattered.
Let's just call it structure and community.
Yeah, your identity of your sense of self is gone.
Yeah, it's gone, completely
and
gone.
you don't know what it is. And there's also PTSD, there's trauma and despair. And people don't always appreciate that, how alone you can be when you leave Scientology. And that's why it's so important.
Amazing.
That's so important. That's why it's so important to connect up with communities online that can help you. When I left the Christian church in when I was 21, there were no internet, there were no communities where I could go to heal or process what I've been through.
Right.
So if you're leaving Scientology, it's important to get online and connect up with communities, even if you're under the radar. Because it's sort of like blood in, blood out, like organized crime. Because you're going to pay a heavy toll to leave, like you have.
Yeah, well, yeah, and what Jeffrey's referring to, that toll, you're going to pay a personal toll. Some people are going to lose their families. No, I didn't. Nobody in my family is Scientology. Some people are going to lose their careers. I did, because that's who I worked for. But even if your job, like my friend who I tried to help, she works in the film industry. She has no connection to Scientology. None of her family is in Scientology. A person like that is only going to pay this internal payment, the debt. That's what they're going to pay. But no matter what it is, like Jeffrey said, it's like leaving the mafia. You're going to pay this incredible price.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember a fellow came over here maybe around 2011.
Yeah.
And he'd been in the church 35 years. And he wanted to see Karen. And he was literally shaking with fear.
Wow.
And he was in his 60s. he said, "You don't understand. I'm not supposed to be here."
Yeah. Right.
And I thought, this is not
Wow.
like it was almost like he was hiding, from the communists who were after him or something.
Right. Right. I mean,
It was
you
extraordinary.
really, yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah.
I know the feeling of like, oh my God, I'm in so much
Hmm.
trouble.
Yeah.
It's a pretty amazing, and it's completely in
But
your head.
yeah, but I'm glad you can come out and talk about, because like I said, I want to do another podcast with you where we talk about style and aesthetics and
Yeah,
and
we
the
can do that.
how asynchronous Scientology is with culture. I've always, like when Tommy Davis replaced Mike Render,
Right.
my immediate impression of Tommy Davis, I actually had two things, and I don't know that I want to say them out plainly. Maybe that's the best way. One, he's full of shit. He's lying. That was my first impression when I saw Tommy. He's full of shit. He knows it. We know it. He's full of shit.
Yeah.
The second thing is, he might be a wealthy trust fund guy. His mom might be a famous actress. His stepfather, Terry Jastrow, successful. But Tommy does not understand culture whatsoever. He doesn't understand Western culture. He doesn't understand it. What he understands is Scientology, and Scientology is not Western culture. It's not an education. It's only an education in Hubbard and Miscavige, and so for me, he was a barometer of the trajectory that the church was about to take, which was bad. It was bad and going to get bad because they somehow, Tom Cruise, when he attacked Brooke Shields, and he almost lost his career, or he got fired from Paramount at least, and he went through a little period, of maybe he was a little bit in the wilderness,
Yeah, he had to go stand
revive.
in the corner for a little bit.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that's where they really went off the rails, I think, and it kept getting worse and worse. And Miscavige was maybe power mad because he had Tom,
Right.
and so it's been interesting to watch since 2005. If you're going to do a time period, I dated as I was a critic before Tom attacked Matt. I remember when he was on Matt Lauer,
Mhm.
and I said, he's going crazy. Who's supposed to be watching Tom today? It was like an amazing thing. Aside
Well,
from 2000,
yeah, nobody's going to watch him that's going to be able to have any control over him. That's for
you,
sure.
you can't tell Tom anything.
No.
So that trajectory from like 2005 to present time, it just continues to get worse. So
Yeah.
Scientology.
You're right.
Well, you guys talk about Scientology wants to reverse the dwindling spiral, while it itself continues to go ever deeper down this dwindling spiral. But it doesn't occur to people in the church that they're going down a dwindling spiral of their own creation.
No, they'll never see it. You can't see it, Jeffrey. It's not possible. You can't be in that bubble. It's like a house of mirrors. You can't be in there and see that. And by the time, I think what makes you see it is abuse. You become abused to the point, and that abuse begins to tear away out your dissociation. And then you start going, wait a minute, these things don't make sense. These two things cannot exist together. I cannot believe that this group holds the key to my eternal spiritual salvation, and they could treat me this way. Then it starts to come apart. Then you can pull your head out of the bubble and you can see it, and you're like, I got to get the hell out of here. And then, as I've discovered, the further you are away from it, you say, wow, what was I thinking? Then you say, oh my God, what was I thinking? And then you say, oh, and it gets louder and louder and louder. And you begin to come to your senses on the whole thing. And then you have to do the heavy lifting of putting your identity back together.
Yeah,
So,
Mitch, can I ask you one question? Because I have to go pretty soon.
yeah, we need to wrap this up. But sir,
one more question.
Absolutely.
In the pandemic era, we lose Danny Sherman. The church loses Danny Sherman.
Right.
You're gone.
Right.
So post-pandemic, with the influence of Danny Sherman gone, who David Miscavige relied on, he relied upon you.
Well, no,
where do
I was gone before Danny died.
okay then
Yeah.
okay we emerged from the pandemic, and some of his architects of style are gone.
Mhm.
What does Miscavige do? What do you see the messaging from the church being right now? How have they changed?
They haven't changed. They have, I think they replaced Danny with I don't know with who, but there was a speechwriter that that's a long story. We could talk about that. But
Yeah.
she's a very talented woman who, not a Scientologist, who was
Really?
she was brought. Yeah, she's a Harvard trained marketing person. It's a long story, but a bunch of Miscavige, when S&P was opening, he arranged for UCLA Extension to put together a 4-unit course, which is a meaty course. I mean, you get 4 college credits out of it. That's a meaty
Yeah.
course. He arranged and paid for a 4-unit certificate in integrated marketing, and there were 3 and we went every night. There was me and a couple other pros. The rest of them were
Yeah.
Sea Org marketing people, but he wanted us to. Anyway, one of the professors who was Harvard trained marketing person, they liked her and she liked them. Remember, she was brought into the bosom of the most seductive, juicy center of Scientology.
Oh, they can love bomb you for sure.
Oh my God. And so she's like,
they
gave
have
her
a
yeah. And so
Oh.
this woman, she was writing, she was starting to take over speech writing while Danny was still alive. She's a very bright woman.
a WOG speechwriter. That's so
Well, I mean, at
fucking
least,
amazing.
I gotta tell you, I mean, Danny said to me once, and he never should have said this. He's lucky that I was not a KR writer. I was not a person who wrote reports. I was a person that would just go, "What the," and that was my report, because I thought all that was literally I was not a KR writer. But Danny once said to me, I write to make Miscavige look smarter, and I'm just like, if I wrote that up as a report. That probably I would have gotten in trouble for attacking Danny. So because
you would have.
that was the way that it worked. But I don't know how to answer your question. I spent 7 years training another director, a Sea Org member who's up at Gold, and he knows how to do that stuff that I did. Like he did the last Super Bowl ad, the one called Rise, which beautiful visually, but it made no sense. It basically said, "You're a piece of shit. You're down in the mud and you can rise." That's what it said to the public. People were like, "What the hell does that mean?"
That's how I took it.
Yeah, but then to Scientologists, they're like, look at our message to the world. We're helping people."
Oh,
so anyway, that one really. But I taught the kid how to visually. He's doing fine. He worked at my side.
So they'll continue to limp on.
Yeah. And they have a good designer that I apprenticed. They have a good director that I apprenticed. They'll be fine. So let's get to some of these last super chats here. Thanks, Russ T, for that super chat. Norman S. Memories believed what Norman S. Memories believed what he was told. Very gung ho, kind of stupid. One of my early cognitive dissonant points in Scientology. This guy's an OT. Yeah, no, I get what you mean, because he was like, yeah, okay, great. Well, thanks for that. Thanks. I appreciate that. That was good. Hey, I hope you're Rusty. I hope you're doing well. And here we got Jacqueline Leach. Thanks for the super chat, Jacqueline. There's doublethink and there's selling out. Sellouts find it harder to admit they've done effed up, according to stats on cults. Now that is a really intelligent. I can always count on Jacqueline for just throwing just a real zinger in there, because that's a very fascinating and I think true statement. What do you think, Jeffrey?
Oh, that would be an interesting discussion.
That's a whole topic right there.
Yeah, when you sell out, that's one thing. When you're indoctrinated into a cult. So where does the boundary occur between someone who's been indoctrinated heavily into a cult and someone who's just flat sold out? That, what Jacqueline's writing, I'd like to do a podcast on, because I know some people who really sold out, and some of them sold themselves very cheaply.
Right.
And other people are true believers.
Right.
So this is a really interesting thing. Yeah, the sellouts are always going to lie about it. I didn't sell out. No.
Yeah.
And I know a sellout who's working online right now. It's a piece of garbage. And the guy knows he's sold out. but the money,
Yeah, it's a paycheck.
you were motivated by saving the planet at some point, and then you fall apart. So Jacqueline's got a really interesting thing. I don't even know if sellouts would ever admit that they'd done anything wrong.
Right.
But that's really a fascinating comment.
Yeah, that is. Maybe hey, Jacqueline, if you want to come on with us and talk about that, Jeffrey's serious about doing. When he says he wants to do a podcast on that, he's not kidding. So I think I think I got all the super chat.
Okay.
And hey, this has been great. So I'm going to bring this. I just want to make sure I didn't miss any questions possibly for you. No, I think we're good. These are all just comments. Hey, listen, this has been really fantastic.
It has been.
It's been really great. Wow, we went for like 2.5 hours, so we're going to bring this to a controlled landing. I'm going to say thank you all very much, and I just want to play my outro of my dog because everybody loves my dog. Oh, and just a couple other little things, please, guys. You can buy me a coffee, help me support my journey to hold Scientology accountable, help me keep the lights on. Also, I'm at 80% on my Indiegogo campaign. It was only a couple of grand. I needed a little bit of money to pay typesetter, some finishing costs for my book, and people were really generous there, but I still, we're almost there. We're at 80%. So you might want to go there and just help me top that off. And and so that's pretty much it. So with that, hold on just 1 second. Okay, let me just throw this in here that Jacqueline said, LOL, I can't be trusted to go live. Zero attachment to brains. Okay, well, maybe we'll do a recorded one. I think that's exactly why we want you on.
Yeah, we'll pre-record it. Yeah.
But yeah, we could pre-record it and edit it and give you some permission on the thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and this is my good friend, Jenna from Kelly. Please, everybody in this chat gave $2 to him, would put him over the edge. Thanks for that. So we're going to go out. My dog's here saying, if you don't take me out, I'm going to poop on your foot. You hear that?
Yep.
So
he's got to go.
Yeah, got to go. So listen, we'll talk to you all soon. Jeffrey, thank you so much. And thank Karen again.
Oh, it was great, Mitch. I'm glad we could meander around things.
Yeah, it was great. Take care, guys. Oh!